Okay, let's get started. It's 3 o'clock. Hey, how you doing? Good to see you. Thank you for coming. Let's get, if we can. I know it's good to see everybody for a change, but let's get seated and get started.
We're not using that. We're going to use this guy.
What we're going to do, I'm going to get everybody seated. She's going to call roll.
Okay.
And then we'll go to the invocation.
Okay.
Public input. Okay, everybody, let's get seated. All right. Thank you very much for coming. We appreciate your in-person attendance. Okay, the first is to call this to order and have Ann call the roll.
Okay, thank you. Reed Williams.
Here.
John Agather. Here. Seymour Battle. Councilwoman Villagran. Peter Onofre. Here. Andy Castillo. Here. Al Rodriguez. Here. Dr. Cantu. Here. Michael Kinnick. Here. Anne Marie. Here. Jack Hebden. Here. Wayne Eddington. Tony Edwards. Michael Sanchez. Here. Didi Balmares. Here. Kurt Anastasia. Here. Norm's not here. Dr. Femi. Dana McGinnis. Here. Jim Berg. Here. And Anita Ledbetter. Here. We have a quorum, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now move into the invocation. Jonathan.
All right, please bow your heads. We thank you for many blessings you have freely given to each of us. We ask for your presence to guide this meeting of the CPS Energy Rate Advisory Committee. Provide them with the knowledge, compassion, and wise counsel needed as they discuss matters of the agenda today. Help us all to remember that we are stewards acting on behalf of our customers, and provide us with the grace to serve all people well. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Okay, we'll now move to public input. We do not have any. Okay, again, welcome back. I think we've got a little break here. Hopefully we won't have another COVID problem that'll scatter us to all directions anytime soon, so we can get some work done. Now, we are at full strength. We have everybody's represented. We do need anyone that would like to be considered for vice chair to please see Dr. Romero, and she is right back there in the white sweater. Also, I think you'll notice we've had some suggestions. We've had some really good critiques on how we're doing. You see we're in a different configuration, so we can see each other. We're also, I think, did I hear that we were going to have food? Food's back there, so you got food now. You got bread and water. We have a timer now, okay? So when we get to that section that says discussion and questions, it will be timed. We think these are all pretty good suggestions. We're going to try them. If they don't work out, we'll try something else. Now, I think that is all of the housekeeping that we had to do. Today we have a very important meeting. We're going to take up two subjects. One, we're going to look at power generation, and the second subject we're going to look at is STEP program. I remind you that the purpose that we're under the charter, because it's sometimes kind of easy to get off track, is that we're supposed to understand and provide thoughtful input. All right, now that means that we give input and we give perspectives. And who do we give them to? We give them to the management of CPS and the Board of Trustees. So about this, if you look at the bylaws, and I have to keep looking at them because people keep telling me we need to do something we're not supposed to do, it says we're supposed to talk about generation planning issues, okay? We're not doing the plan for CPS, okay? We're not doing their job. But in order to understand what we're dealing with, we are going to go through, in this first part, what I would now properly term a simulation, because we have made assumptions about future, not just historical prices, but we've had to make some assumptions as we go through this. We're going to take this in several steps, but many people have said, why are we doing this? And I've been criticized because people say, Reed, we don't know what you're doing. So I'm going to be very careful to tell you what we're doing and why we're doing it. The reason we're doing it is because we've got global warming, we've got aging natural gas plants, and we've got a portfolio mix that is going to be difficult to transition to zero emissions generation. That's what we're trying to do. Now, how we get there might be a little bumpy, but that's where we're going. We're going to look at a portfolio mix, and in just a minute, we'll start the introductory slides. I'll speak first, then Kevin Polo will come up. He'll talk about the assumptions. Every model, every simulation has assumptions. So it's important we understand what the assumptions are. And if we have a problem with the assumptions, we will make a note and we'll discuss those when we get to discussion. Let's try to hold our questions so we can get all the way through this. If we get all the way through this, it might actually answer some questions that you had earlier. I'll talk about the introduction, then Kevin will talk about the assumptions, and then John Kossip and Galen will go through the simulation. Okay? I want to specifically thank John and Galen for their hard work on this. This got done in light speed, folks, and with a level of professionalism unmatched. That's all I can say. If you want to add to it, you can. So let's go ahead and start on the introduction slides. What'd I do? Oh, use this? Oh, I'm in control? That's a new thing. Now all I got to do is figure out which one to hit. Okay, here we are. These are objectives. Again, Reed, give them your objectives. It's a 5-year transition. Okay, we're not talking 20, 30 years out. We're trying to get a plan that will allow us to transition from where we are now in 5 years. It might not be 5 years. CPS might say it's a different time. I don't know. But you got to start with some assumption, and it's 5 years. We're going to minimize new capital. All right, it doesn't do any good to spend a whole lot of capital now until we know what we need to spend it on in the future when we get new technologies. I'm convinced we're going to get new technologies. I don't know what they are, and I couldn't argue for any one of them today. We're going to stop burning coal. We've got to maintain reliability. We want to reduce CO2 emissions. We are under a climate action plan that's been adopted by the City Council and I think also CPS. I believe that's right. Correct me if I'm wrong. We're going to close an old natural gas steam plant. Okay? These plants were built in the late 60s, early 70s, and like they say, they need to go. Then we want to position CPS Energy to be a quick, fast adapter of new commercialized technology. Emphasis commercialized. We are not an experimental center, okay? We cannot take that risk. We are in a very risky world today. I mean, we're at war, basically. If people don't believe it, look around, the news. I can only take about 30 minutes of it. All right, here's the simulation model. It's a simulation to change the mix. Anything we're doing is a mix. You do not do it with one process. You have to have a mix. Each process makes up for the other's weakness, we hope. We want to understand the generation mix. Back to our charge in the bylaws to understand and provide. understand first, provide second. I think some people have accused us of providing first and not understanding at all, but we're going to try to understand. We got assumptions, and we've got to give you metrics as we walk through this. Here's the changes that we're going to look, and this is the base case. This is not Reed's case. There's nothing up here that wasn't in the Flex Power Bundle 14 months ago or 15 months ago. Time flies. It's just taking and saying, let's look at one thing. If we don't like it, we can change it, but you got to start from a base. And the base is very simple. We're going to add, the Flex Power Bundle wants 900 megawatts of solar. We want to convert the Spruce 2 to natural gas. You got to add some dispatchable generation. You add intermittent renewables, you're going to have to back it up with something. This is a purchase of power, not building a plant. It is very similar to the purchase power agreements in our simulation. Today, we don't own solar fields or wind farms. We go and contract for those. And same thing with the natural gas. I would like it to be what they're starting to call in Europe a green natural gas plant, which means they control their methane emissions and they recapture the CO2. It's a transition plant. Remember, we're in transition. If there's a word you got to remember, you got to think about transition. I know that that's hard for some people because, like I've been told, I'm an incrementalist. A lot of people here are not incrementalists, but with the career I've had, if I wasn't an incrementalist, the risk was too high, and I'm just afraid of, risk scares me, and so you got to take it a little at a time. Close the old Browning steam plants and close Spruce 1. All right, that's pretty much the base case. How are we going to look at these and evaluate them? The first one is fuel cost. Does fuel cost go up or does it go down as you make these changes? Does the cost of power purchase agreements go up or down? That includes buying more solar and also includes buying more quick start natural gas power. Is there additional cost for market purchases? This is a very important point. This is the point where we tie into the grid. We cannot look at our simulation in just a closed system because we're part of the ERCOT system. And the way we tie in is we're always looking for purchases at the next day price for power on ERCOT, the average day price. Not 15 minutes, but it's the best we can come up with. When we do that, we're making an assumption that any changes in ERCOT is reflected in that price, and we're using that back into if we have to buy power or if we don't have to buy power. Does the emissions go down? We could study all kinds of emissions. I've studied more emissions than I want to think about. But if we just concentrate on CO2, that's the biggie. And we'll concentrate on that. And then we've got an assumption in here, we've got a calculation in here of what does it do to the average retail monthly price. Chad's got a system worked out. This is something that I think Rudy recommended, and I agree with it. We need to see that. It's a good indicator. It's just an indicator. Does that mean everybody's bill is exactly that way? No, but that's an indicator. Now, I'm going to turn it over to, I guess, Kevin's next, Kevin Polo, and he'll talk about the assumptions. I saw him earlier. Oh, yeah, he's coming. Okay. Well, he's got a long way to come, so I'm sorry.
Well, thank you. Appreciate the introduction, Reed. Good afternoon, everybody. Kevin Palo, Vice President, Energy Supply and Market Operations. And as Reed said, what I would like to do is walk you through the assumptions that we used in pulling together the simulation. So I just have to advance. Thank you. Much appreciated. So we'll go through, again, kind of a quick overview of the purpose of this model or this simulation, talk a little bit about how it works, and obviously my main focus will be on the assumptions. I'll turn it over to John here in a minute. John will give you a much more detailed introduction into what the spreadsheet itself looks like, how it works, and then we'll kind of show you the before and after, if you will, in looking at the simulation. So I want to start, with a couple of purpose statements. Really what we're looking at here with this simulation is, as this slide shows, it's a high-level view, right? It's intended to be kind of a screening opportunity. I look at it as a first step, right? This is not kind of the end of the process. This is intended to provide a frame of reference for us to look at and understand as we make decisions around what our generation mix looks like, how that impacts our customers through a couple of key metrics, a couple of different criteria that we'll talk about here shortly. We did focus on historical data. This is very much a backcast looking at kind of knowing what we've fixed things that actually happened, right? Market prices, fuel prices. We kept those as they happened in history so that we fixed those variables. There's going to be a lot of different variables, a lot of different assumptions that we talk about in the generation planning process. And the purpose of today's simulation is to look at what happens really when you change a small subset of those variables, which is going to be our generation mix. Outcomes may change as all these other assumptions and all these other variables change, but we wanted to look at kind of the limited impact of the generation mix. So by keeping history intact, so to speak, we don't have to worry about what happens when market prices change or fuel prices change, for example. We can focus on if history would have repeated itself with a different generation mix, how would the outcomes have looked? When you look at kind of what we've labeled as limitations, obviously this is not a forward-looking view. We're not looking at forward market prices or forward assumptions. I think that's all part of the continuation of this conversation over the next few months. But this takes our key data and history and looks backwards. Obviously, that last bullet, there's a lot of other things that we will factor into and will need to factor into as we go through the process. Things like how you manage and mitigate risk, for example. That's all part of the the kind of the formula that has to get pulled together as we look at what our future will look like. This slide kind of shows a high-level view here of what we tried to do with the simulation. So again, we started with historical data, and that's what kind of the anchored to. So we started with our actual demand, right? What did our customers use every day over the last 4 years in terms of demand? How much energy did we have to produce to meet our customers' needs? That's fixed. So as we look at history, as we look at the simulation, that didn't change. We'll have a historical view, based on how our units ran, the actual fuel cost that was incurred, the way our wind and solar resources performed, and what we spent in terms of those power purchase agreements. Again, all that will be fixed as it actually happened in history. And then when you look at, in green, the transition case, then we'll start to change things, right? We'll start to add, as Reed said, we'll look very much, those scenarios and the steps that Reed showed very much match our flex power bundle, right, in terms of adding up to 900 megawatts of solar, adding firming capacity, retiring the Browning units, and then we also talked about converting Spruce 2 to gas and finished kind of the simulation by looking at shutting down Spruce 1. So those last two steps, not directly part of the flex power bundle, but very much part of the flexible path resource plan that we put out last January. So in that transition case, that will be the things that change, right, is what generating units we use to meet that demand. And then when you look at the results, those are the key metrics that I was talking about earlier. We'll look at the impacts, to our customers and the impacts to history in terms of how our fuel cost differs under this simulation compared to what actually happened. How our power purchase agreements, and so that will be the total of, for historical, that will basically be all of our renewables. When we look at the transition case, that will add in existing renewables, the historical renewables. It will add in the new solar. And it will also include the cost of the firming capacity that we would buy through a power purchase agreement. Market purchases, right? Whenever as we look at the simulation, days where we don't have enough generation to have met that historical demand, we assume we would buy from the market to meet the demand. So that's one of the trade-offs that we look at. And then obviously, we focused on carbon CO2 emissions, but we wanted to look at the environmental aspect. And again, as you change the generation mix, how do some of these key parameters change? Bear with me, 4 pages here, but I'll try to move through these fairly quickly. But these are some of the key assumptions that we wanted to make sure we covered before we started. I had John kind of walk through the actual spreadsheet itself. But again, as we look at the transition cases, based on historical fuel prices and things, what you'll see is estimates of what our fuel costs, our purchase power costs, emissions would have been as we switched the generation mix. We are using the last 4 years of data, so calendar years 18, 19, 20, and 21. And we did include a high-level residential bill impact, as Reed mentioned. I'll cover that in some more detail here on a different slide. I already mentioned our historical demand is fixed. That will not change in all of these simulations. The last bullet I do want to focus on, we do factor in ancillary services. You may recall a couple meetings ago we showed you all a table of utilization, if you will, how all the percent of time, capacity factors is the term we use, but how the percent of time that our units were generating energy. What that view didn't show you was how we use the capacity also to meet our ancillary service obligations. So as the footnote shows, ancillary services, they're products used by ERCOT really to manage the grid and help to provide grid reliability. So essentially what ERCOT is doing is buying capacity. So we have an obligation every day, every hour, to provide a certain number of megawatts of ancillary services. And we can either do that through our generation or we can buy it from ERCOT. So it's an obligation similar to energy. So we did factor that into this simulation. And so it is a use of our capacity along with the demand and the energy that our customers use. When you look at some of the key changes, right, 2018, this simulation does include the DELA units. That was part of history. 2019, the DELA units retired. When we look at 2020, we start to see impacts of the pandemic. And so mainly that shows up in terms of our demand, for example. We did see some different changes in demand profiles because of the pandemic. 2021 includes Winter Storm Uri. Another important thing to note is the change in gas prices. Historically, as you look at the start of this simulation in 2018 through 2020, we were in a period where natural gas prices were really declining for a variety of reasons. Production, we here in Texas have the benefit of the Eagle Ford Shale, the Permian Basin, so a lot of gas that's produced here in Texas helped to keep prices low. We started to see, again, with the pandemic, you started to see demand changes, with not only electrical, changes in electrical use, but less transportation use in terms of cars on the road, et cetera. So you had a lot of shifts in the global market for oil and gas. That trend started to change towards the end of last year. So in 2021, the historical data does show that rise in gas prices. As we built this simulation, though, we did notice, Winter Storm Uri is a very extraordinary event. When you're trying to compare year over year, the change in demand, the change in fuel prices with the natural gas run-up, created some interesting anomalies, if you will, in the data. So we put in an option where we could turn on or off Winter Storm Uri. So you could, if you turn off the effects of Uri, basically we looked at market prices and fuel prices from the week before, carried those through the week of Winter Storm Uri. Gives us a better way to compare the 4 years, in their entirety. But if you want to see how Winter Storm Uri affects everything, we have the ability to turn that back on and actually show the impacts. When we look at fuel costs, that category, that basically includes coal and natural gas. We did exclude nuclear fuel costs for a couple of reasons. The primary reason is because it's a constant. It's really not going to change as we change scenarios here for the purposes of this simulation. It's a relatively smaller factor in terms of total fuel compared to coal and gas. We also had some confidentiality concerns since there's multiple owners involved, so we just kept it as a constant and excluded it from that particular category when we show you the results. I think I mentioned this, but the power purchase agreement category, when we look at historical, we'll cover or show basically our historical wind and solar contracts. As we look forward, it will show, as we add new solar, that cost will get added into that power purchase agreement slide or category, as will the cost of the firming capacity. When we look at how we built the cost, our actual historical cost for renewables over the last 4 years is about $63, $64 a megawatt hour. I think you have a presentation in front of you that provides some more detail on how and kind of the timing of when we signed contracts, what the market prices were in those timeframes. But as we look at actual history, that's basically where our renewable costs have been over the last 4 years. So that shows up in your historical cost. As we look at the simulation, we kept that constant. Those prices did not change. As we look at what we assumed for new solar, however, it's a very different. We used $24 a megawatt hour, and that's consistent with again, it's in your packet, but there's a Department of Energy study that we showed some highlights on, or a multi-year trend of prices, and so that's the price we use. So again, a very different price point as we look at introduction of new solar compared to some of the contracts that were signed, several years ago. For the firming capacity, when we talk about a new combined cycle or adding a combined cycle, we used a Lazard report, which shows that cost at about $45 a megawatt hour. What we wanted to include, again, when you buy wind or solar, that's an all-in cost, right? We pay that cost when we buy the energy, and there's no additional capital, no additional O&M that we spend. So we wanted to use this $45 a megawatt hour cost for the new firming capacity, again, as an all-in cost. So, there's that basically then factors in not only your energy cost, but your fuel cost, but also the O&M and the capital that would have been used to purchase, construct, or operate the plant. So again, it's an all-in cost. That's the best way, I think, to compare or to include the full range of impacts, is to use that all-in cost. As Reed said, when we look at market purchases, we used, again, the historical ERCOT, what we call the day-ahead price. So today, in ERCOT, there's a day-ahead market, and so energy prices for tomorrow, there's a price that's set today in the day-ahead market. There's prices that are calculated every 5 minutes, in real time. But we use the day-ahead price, and again, we fixed it at what actually happened day by day, hour by hour, over the last 4 years. One of the simulations, or part of that, assumes the Spruce 2 gas conversion. Again, we did not assume incremental capital, as Reed said. Basically, we assumed that the capital cost that we would have to spend to convert Spruce 2 essentially kind of nets against what we would have spent for the ELG upgrade or the effluent limitation guideline environmental upgrades that we assumed are continued to run Spruce 2 on coal. So we basically figured we weren't spending the capital on the environmental upgrades, so it netted against what we would have to spend in terms of converting the unit to gas. So point there is we didn't add any incremental capital or reduce capital from the simulation. We stuck basically to the fuel cost. Once we convert Spruce 2 to natural gas for the purposes of this simulation, we assumed that it would operate in the market very much like Summers 1. So the heat rate is very similar. So what that looks like is, again, based on your fuel price and market prices, the amount of energy that we assumed Spruce 2 would produce day over day, we just basically matched what Summers 1 actually produced, how it actually ran in the market over the last 4 years. The one thing we did not include from Flex Power Bundle was the 50 megawatts of energy storage. We did not factor that into this simulation, in part because, again, that 50 megawatts of energy storage wasn't part of our historical actuals. We felt it would be a fairly minor change to the future, so we decided to leave it out of the purposes of this simulation. I wanted to also point out, it's very important, when we look at market purchases, we didn't want to provide the impression that those were essentially emissions-free. I mean, there's a generating unit in ERCOT that is producing the energy that we're buying off the market. So what we did is we took the actual capacity mix in ERCOT, how energy has actually been produced, and so we have a mix then of nuclear and coal and natural gas and renewables. We paired that with some of our emissions assumptions that are included in our flexible path resource plan, and we use that to calculate, effectively what the amount of emissions per megawatt hour that would be produced by ERCOT as we buy that power off the market. So you see that there, it's 875 pounds per megawatt hour, but that way, again, we're trying to represent the fact that not everything that we buy off the market in ERCOT at this point in time would be truly emissions-free. And then really the last item, I mentioned it, but we did want to include an element of residential bill impact, and so what you'll see is there's a cost difference between the simulation and our actual historicals. We took a ratio, about 5 cents per $1 million is the estimate of what it would cost on a residential bill. And so you'll see that bill impact, just again as an indicator, of how these things will ultimately flow through to the customer as we potentially would make these changes. So that's really the end of the assumptions. I'll turn it over to John. John will walk you through how the spreadsheet is set up, how it works, and then we'll step through the different sequences of steps that Reed lined out, and then we'll pause at the end there and we'll go through the results, how historical looks differently compared to the simulation. So John, I'll turn it to you.
All right, thank you, Kevin. I'm John Kossip, Senior Director of Energy Portfolio Analytics, and hopefully Kevin Powell has given you a background on the assumptions, getting you comfortable with it. I'll go through, there's some slides you've already seen, but we wanted them all kind of together here so we could have a discussion about the simulation. Now, the simulation was put together by several on my team, as well as power generation and our environmental department. So, cross-functional team. We had Galen McFadden, our market program analytics manager, that led that effort and did the programming on this thing. So, hope Kevin's got you comfortable with that the assumptions are reasonable, and we can make settings, we can make changes all we want to this Excel spreadsheet, but ultimately, we as Reed mentioned, we think about that end goal, getting to the board and getting guidance and advice on where to head, with some decisions on this. The simulation, how it works, Kevin's gone through this, but I'll hit a few more key points here. The annual demand will not change when you make a change to the supply. If we work our way up and look at the historical supply, work our way up on the transition case supply, we notice that the nuclear and existing renewables, those are basically constants. They're not going to change. The cost won't change. But when we get to the coal and gas and market purchases categories, we'll have some changes. So some of the volume, the generation will change with an associated change with cost, adding solar, combined cycle, removing coal and gas, converting Spruce 2 from coal to gas, and then the market purchases. That box is a little bit bigger because those will increase some with an associated cost. And then we have on the right-hand side the historical results. Again, historicals are baseline, and what we'll see is the incremental cost on the transition case. Incremental fuel, power purchase, market purchases, and then that incremental CO2 emission, and that'll be a reduction that we'll see. All right, just a reminder here. I think you've got that in your packet. So just a reminder of the changes that we'll make, and we'll make these live on the Excel. And I think at this point we're going to cut over to the Excel spreadsheet and just go live. All right, so bear with us a bit. We can get you a full page printout of the whole thing if needed. And oh, you got that? Okay, good. That'll give you the full picture. We're going to have to scroll here because of the resolution here on the screen, but I think it'll work. So if we look at column B there, Bravo, there, calendar year, we've got 4 years, and the 4 years will give you some sense of, we had different weather, we had different market prices, different gas prices. So some key market conditions have changed over the time. So that gives us some sense of how things have changed. If we look at electric demand, really, some similar there, some growth. I mean, weather's going to affect that. A moderate year, mild weather, you'd have some back off of that. But really, in 2020, you see that drop down. That's really that pandemic year that dropped electric demand down some, and also impacted market prices, and those were reduced. So now if we look at the historical and kind of take a look at D, E, and F, the fuel cost, we see a range there. That's the coal and the gas. A range of $300 to $370 million. Notice the 3 zeros at the top. If you're not familiar with looking at that, you have to add 3 zeros to each number of the cost numbers. So that 295 is 295 million, 573,000. So keep that in mind. And then we total up the fuel cost there. So you have a 4-year total. And so that would be 1.2 billion. And similarly for power purchase agreement cost, that's your existing renewables. Really a pretty steady output that we're seeing here historically. I mean, it's going to vary some. The renewables do vary each year. So that's really the key difference there as you see the numbers change from year over year. Then we move to column F, our market purchases we talked about, kind of that daily average price and purchasing to that. This grouping contains the actual costs we experienced. Then the total cost. So total cost would be fuel, power purchase, ERCOT market purchase, summed up, and that gives us total cost section. Then CO2 emissions, pretty straightforward. That's millions of tons per year from the fleet, and that's coming from our coal, gas, and then market purchases. We have that assumption for CO2 that would come from a purchase. All right, some things to note. Let's scroll back over to the historical side. We'll look at a couple year-over-year things to key on. If we look at H3, that cell H3, column H, we see in 2018, 18 million tons of CO2, and then we see a large reduction for the next 3 years, and that's the Dealey coal units, the 2 units that we closed at the end of 2018. So they're not in the generation mix in 2019. So you see that marker there. So really 2019, 2020, and 2021 are our typical generation mix without major adjustments or changes. One other key note is in 2021 was the Winter Storm Uri year. Now, we've smoothed that out, as Kevin mentioned, the assumptions. We've got a switch. We can switch it back and take a look at what it would look like in an extreme case. So it says normalized. That's the buzzword for, we smoothed it out and put some typical values in for gas prices and typical values for market prices. And smooth that out, and then you see a much larger impact. The numbers change on us, and it's really that 1 week that creates that impact. And it would be a bit of a distraction, and we can look at that as needed. But what we've got in this simulation is a normalized setting for it currently. So. One more item is row 8. That's our totals. It's consistently the 4-year total, except when we get to that right-hand side on bill impact, you'll see an average there. So given that, we'll move now to we're going to move to our transition case. We're going to go ahead and make the settings. You'll see the numbers start to update. These are incremental costs that we'll see kind of move in. And as we do that, we'll look at column K. Column K is our existing gen mix. That's historical. That's all of our units. They're, you can see the type of unit, what fuel it uses, and the relative size in megawatts. And then as we get to row 32, then there's the choices there. There's the new combined cycle we can turn on or off. And the new solar we can add, and we've got 900 megawatts kind of teed up, ready to turn that on, and the associated costs that are assumed. Then on row 22 and 20, looks like 23 and 22 and 23 is the Spruce 2 coal unit, and we have a switch there to switch it to the gas, and the associated costs, CO2 impacts, the emission rates, those will all update and be reflected in the table above, the transition case table. So that is it. And if you kind of get disoriented or lost or something, we've got the full printout there on your table there to look at. But so what we're going to do here is make our settings on the transition case. We're going to set the 900 megawatts of solar, turn it on. Ideally, you want to see the numbers move. You can start to see the numbers change, but what we're going to do is go ahead and make all those settings. Convert Spruce 2 coal unit to natural gas. We'll turn it off as a coal unit, turn it on as a gas unit. Our little error checking logic on the side says, yeah, that's good, valid, you got a good setting. Then we're going to go to 500 megawatts of combined cycle, a little greater than that, about 518. Turn it on. Then we're going to close the aging gas steam units, the Browning units. 869, or about 869 megawatts total of capacity. And the last item is the close the Spruce 1 coal unit. No direct replacement for that. Basically, market purchases would fill in that gap, and as well as some of the other fleet. So, all right, so that's it. There are the changes. So now let's let's kind of step through this and see what happened here. We had all zeros. We have incremental costs. We have a negative number, so that's a cost savings there on the fuel cost column J. Year over year, fairly consistent. Not a whole lot of movement there. I mean, $80 million to $86 million savings, and that's really the coal and gas generation that we've turned off. So that's I guess a benefit, you would say, with a cost savings. Now there's some offsetting costs. That's what we tend to see in generation planning. You'll see those. There's a series of trade-offs to be made as you make planning decisions. So power purchase agreement cost. What we have in there is the existing renewables. We have the new 900 megawatts of solar. And we have the all-in cost of the combined cycle plant in this column. So you see, year over year, $125, $140 million with a $539 million total for the 4 years. Now we move to the column L, ERCOT market purchase. Some variation there, so we'll talk about that. The purchases did increase, so that was a cost increase, $250,000, and that was the change to our fleet, So, as we close coal units that are very competitive in the market, that has to be made up by other means, things like that. Solar profile at night is not producing, so there's some opportunities to make purchases there. So it's just indicative of the variables that are changing here and the gen mix that's changing. That 1 year, that's 2020, that looks much lower. It is much lower. So what's going on there? Well, that was a low market price year. It was a very just mild market prices driven by low natural gas prices. So nothing unusual there, just that's the key driver behind that. So then we get to the total cost columns. It totals up J, K, and L are totaled there. And then we have the 4-year total. And then we see our CO2 emissions column. Pretty consistent, 5 to 6 million ton reduction and 20 million tons over 4 years. So some netting going on there, but there was some, as you close coal and gas units, fossil units, and add solar, and add market purchases, there, you net those together and you eventually come up with this, net improvement in CO2 emissions. So the estimated bill impact, again, it's high level, kind of a rule of thumb we're using there, but I think reasonable for this level of effort here. And it shows that range of, $3 to $6 per residential bill per month, and an average about $4.50. So that's it. That's all I have, and I guess we'll move on to the next phase of question and answer.
Okay, let's start with, anybody have any questions? Why don't we just do this? We'll just start here and we'll just move around if that's okay. And there's a timer somewhere, so please start.
Is there a timer on the question or a timer on the answer?
Well, which one do you want it on? Do you care? If the answer is longer than 2 minutes, we'll stop. But
All right.
I don't know. I'm not sure how we actually do this. We're trying something new, so
Let's
I
just
doubt
start.
any question will be
Yeah,
two
Let me just
minutes.
ask, is it
Well,
the...
let's start with Anita.
Oh, okay, go ahead,
Yeah,
Anita.
please.
I'll give you
All right,
a
go ahead.
I have a mic. That's okay.
You have the mic.
Yes. First, I want to say thank you so much, and especially thank you, John Kossip. They did an excellent spreadsheet. Thank you so much for going through everything with us. I guess, it occurs to me a couple of things, and then I'll come with my question. First, when we look at the transition case over the historical case, obviously there's a couple of trade-offs that you mentioned. One, it seems that it is more... Obviously, there's a huge cost savings there. One of my questions will be to clarify what the overall total cost savings would be. Second is obviously it's cleaner, but we're trading off our fuel cost in the historical case for the ERCOT market purchase cost, which is higher, but it's offset by the fuel savings, right? But then there's also... it just seems to me long-term here that it's kind of a bridging strategy, because then we're open to we're vulnerable to that ERCOT market price, and also the 875 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour that I understand are not calculated in the spreadsheet. But I guess I just wanted to kind of say that generally, and for you to go over your thoughts on that.
State your question again. Make sure I understand, okay?
Okay, so let me start over. Sorry about that. So, in reviewing the historical, the left side, the historical case over the transition case that's on the right, there's a couple of trade-offs that were made. And so I just wanted to kind of get some validation over my thinking or my understanding of this, and to ask a question. So first, obviously, we're trading off our fuel cost for what appears to be a more cost-effective strategy. However, it does raise our ERCOT market purchase in the transitional case. So my question is, one, what is that overall projected transitional cost savings? Right, and then second would be a comment about, my understanding is that the 875 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour are not reflected in that transitional case, which is just kind of a comment. I wanted to ask you to clarify that. And the last part of that is to talk about, it seems to me it's kind of a bridging strategy, because the only Achilles heel there is that even though it's cheaper, temporarily we'll be more vulnerable to that ERCOT market price. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
All right, good. Thanks for the question. So, well, Reed will handle the timer here. I know you can't see it. It's all right. He's doing it right. All right, so bridging strategy, that's interesting to bring that up. I know, Reed mentioned that, like transition. The 800 plus pounds of per megawatt hour of CO2 from the ERCOT market, we counted for that. It's in there. It's in that CO2 emissions count, because historically the generator is responsible for it, and if you buy it, then that generator is responsible. We wanted the whole, we wanted to capture the whole thing in there, so it's in there. As far as the trade-offs you're mentioning, that's true. We don't have the final cost. This is just an indicator of some key variables. They're probably in the ballpark with this scenario. But I would say that you mentioned something about ERCOT market, and that's a key risk there, exposure to that market and be able to manage that risk exposure. So.
And that last question, what was our overall cost
Yeah.
savings in the transitional case?
Let me answer that. I got your question down. The answer is, this doesn't take all cost savings in, okay? Clearly, if you're closing down plants, you've got maintenance cost savings, you've got labor cost savings, so it's not intended to show all cost savings. All right, Jim? Oh, wait.
I do want to add just one thing. Do you have, I think you guys have the results in front of you. So I do want to clarify, when we talk about savings, we did show some savings on the fuel cost. We saw some incremental or increases, if you will, on the market purchase and on the power purchase agreements. So overall, when you look at total, the cost did go up. So there was a bill impact, again, if you go over to the far column, where it would be, based on how this ran with history and the assumptions we've made, it would be more expensive for the customers on a monthly bill basis compared to what happened in history. So I did want to say that we did see savings in one category, but some increases in the others as well. So it was overall a net increase.
Jim?
Okay. Is it, in seeing what's being closed, what's being changed, is it now CPS's intent to invest, not to invest capital to produce our own power, but rather to purchase it?
Well, that's an option to consider. I mean, that's really at the kind of a high strategic level, that is an important question to answer, and we'd like feedback on that from this committee.
I guess that what that leads to is, how does purchase power then, as opposed to being able to control our own power generation internally, differ in cost to the client, to the customer, from just, in other words, internally generated as opposed to purchase power? Because
Okay.
it seems like a real philosophical change on the part of the organization to do that.
Well, that's not a change on the part of the organization. This is a look at a base case. So let me be clear, there's no change in philosophy here. It's just saying, if we did this. So we're not saying there's a change, we're just saying, let's look and see what happens if we do this. And frankly, it doesn't include all the cost. And the big reason we put the power purchase in there of the combined cycle is so that it would look similar to the power purchase agreements that we're using with solar. So we didn't have one on a capital basis and one on a purchase basis. We were trying to keep it comparable, Jim. That's the reason that's in there, not because we're making a change in policy.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can I just add something to that, Jim, if you don't mind? When we talk about purchase power versus building our own power plant, for instance, to be able to close our older gas units down, part of the flex power bundle that we're considering, that we're working on right now, does include some purchase power natural gas, because we can go out and contract for a price that's fixed, that we can control a lot quicker than we can build a power plant to replace that capacity. So we're going to have to use some purchase power agreements while the board determines how much plants we're going to continue to operate on our own. We're great operators. It takes a while to build power plants, and so that's a decision point that we'll put to the board that certainly we want the RAC to weigh in on.
One final question, or I guess always had my arms trying to understand, what is the total output per day or per year total megawatt hours that CPS, so when you say you're going to add 90 megawatts of solar, what is that as a percentage of what our total output is per year? It would really help when you're doing that to put things in some perspective, because otherwise it's just 90. It's a number 90 to me, and I don't get the full arithmetic deal.
They're going to get a more accurate answer, but generally speaking, if you look in the flex power bundle, you add all the capacity up, not the utilization, but the capacity. So you got to look at capacity, and then you got to look at, if our memory's right, it's about 6.2 or 6.4. So it's 6,200 megawatts, if I got it right. Rudy, is that about right? Somebody correct me on that. 6,000. Call it even 6,000. That's capacity. So when you're talking about 900 to 6,000, I think that answers your relationship question. Okay? We're going to do these off the cuff, and I'll stand corrected. Okay? We're not going to have them get corrected. Go ahead. Okay. Good. Dana, go ahead.
A couple of clarifications, if you can, please, first. On the historical charts, we're in the ERCOT market purchase program each of those years. Seems like I remember, maybe it was before 2018, that CPS actually made $100 million by selling supply into ERCOT. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, that was correct.
What year was that?
2018 and 2019 years were some pretty significant years for wholesale sales, and you're remembering correctly. We're not showing that. We're showing a cost side here, just a simplified view of fuel and power purchases on a cost side. We're not showing the offsetting or some sort of a benefit from the wholesale. That's something that can be brought in as we get into more detailed analysis.
And the same would be true of the normalization of the Winter Storm Uri. Basically, you didn't count it in there?
We can show it. We threw the switch as we were demoing it, but we smoothed it out just for the purpose of getting a sense of year-over-year changes. The Uri effect we can show in this spreadsheet. We've got the costs in there.
Well, isn't there a way to sort of plan, maybe not in this model, for the events that really happen that are outliers that either make you money or cost you money? Because I don't see it here.
Yeah, correct. That's the I guess a limitation in this model. We're trying to show some initial concepts first, a few variables that are very important to keep sight on, to talk about risk and get a better foundation, and then we can kind of move to something more sophisticated.
And so to follow that thought, when you're going into the market of ERCOT, you're assuming it's going to be there, first of all. If San Antonio needs it, wouldn't somebody else need it too? Or where is the extra capacity coming from? And, of course, the way you did your model, it looks like, is you just took whatever the price was the next day on the shortfall, all right? So, and again, that doesn't make any allowance for the likelihood that there's not going to be enough power available and the price is going to be much higher than you modeled.
Yeah, good point. I mean, there's market risk, and that's a key concept that we need to chase down. We're looking backward at a historical backcast, but as we look forward with a more sophisticated type analysis, that's certainly something, a key risk to manage and to understand what the ERCOT grid can provide in the future, or what risk we may face.
Just one comment, Dana, to follow up on what you just asked. If you see an increased purchases, you can figure your risk is going up. It's an indication of risk, okay? Now, is it exactly what happened? No, but it's saying if you make this risk, you are going to increase. If you make this change, you're going to increase risk. That's what it says.
Yeah, so that's what you're saying now.
Yeah.
We're going to make this product mix.
Yeah, I'm just saying we're not going to do it. I'm just saying if you do
No,
this,
but
the base case.
I understand.
Okay,
Reed.
well,
and so
use the right word.
So you yourself said you didn't like the risk, but this looks like it's adding risk.
So Just a couple of things I would add. The historical prices that we use do include what actually happened. So there are days, we did smooth out Winter Storm Uri, but there are other days where we saw, as John said, in 2020, we saw some very mild market prices. When you look at 2018, 2019 particularly, we had some events in 2019 where we saw $9,000 pricing for a few hours. So those historical prices, with the exception of Uri, are in there. So when we had periods of scarcity in ERCOT, that's captured in this simulation. I agree with you, and that's one of the things where I said one of the limitations when we look at other things we got to consider is we look at the entirety of the conversation, in terms of the generation mix. Risk, I think, is a very important consideration, and how you could say, as we have historically had a generation long position, so part of the benefit of that is kind of being in control of your own destiny, in the sense that we should have generation to meet our needs. To the earlier question, there's some philosophical decisions we could make and conversations to have about, is that the future that we want? Do we want to always be generation long, or do we have other strategies, as far as additional purchase power? Those are some of the things that I do think is part of the conversation that we should have over the next few months. It wasn't part of what we were able to show in this type of simulation, though.
Femi?
My questions are going to be very quick because I still feel we need some clarification. So I don't want to go too deep into the things I would like to know. But first of all, I'll say it is obviously fairly comprehensive in what it looks like. But my first question as a modeler myself is, will we be seeing the inner workings of this model at some time in the future? Because all you're showing us now are results and switches. We don't know what's going on. I mean, you've explained it, but is it adequately captured in the model? That's something I look for when I look at models. So if you have an answer, that's good. My second question is, the green box is essentially what we call our base case. Is that correct? It's a transition, but it's a base case transition because we will be looking at other types of transitions. Is that correct?
It's the green box is the transition case as compared to our gen mix today.
Okay, so those switches that you had on and off could be in several combinations. Are we going to be looking at those combinations as well to see the impact on bills and the results?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I want to know this because we're talking about essentially generation planning, as I understand it, involves a number of scenarios. And those scenarios are just one of what we have looked at right now. If we change the combination of switches, we might see different results. I don't know until we try it out and see what the results look like. So I guess my assumption is that we will be looking at other combinations of switches.
And we'll talk about that. I mean,
Yeah, originally we had thought about taking it step by step. The reason we didn't is when we looked at that the first time, it took too much time, and we're trying to get an overview here. It's not the final thing. And then we'll go back, and when people say, well, take this out, and we can look at it, but I'm trying to get people to start up here before they go down here. And it's just up here. And as far as looking at the model itself, I don't know if there's any reason people can't look at it. It just takes a lot of time. I guess we could set up a workshop or something.
That's what I look for when I look
yeah.
at models. I'm sorry, that's just me.
One thing I want to add, I do agree there are a lot of different scenarios that we need to discuss. And I think one of the things we'll be looking for as far as input and feedback from the committee is what type of scenarios do we want to look at? Because not only can we look at those through the lens of this simulation tool, but I think just more importantly, as we look at the more complex modeling we'll do as we go forward, the forward-looking view as far as looking at what your forward-looking assumptions are on fuel prices, market prices, et cetera. We need to have a variety of scenarios that we're going to look at and run through the models to see, again, as we run it through bill impact, to be able to come back with that comprehensive story of how it would affect our community and our customers. So that is something that in the next couple meetings we'll be looking for and sharing with you and seeking input on is what are the scenarios that we want to look at.
I don't want my 2 minutes to run out, but I'll quickly say, for example, if you put on a switch that says 900 megawatts of solar, what if we only want to add 500? That's another scenario. It's a switch, but it's another scenario we can look at and see what the impacts will be. That's just a sense of what I'm thinking about. But my final question is on the CO2 emissions, which the impacts you've shown here are simply changes in amounts of emissions. Did you account for any kind of costs associated with those emissions?
There's no explicit accounting for costs in this simplified model.
Thank you.
Kurt?
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, good. Well, first I want to congratulate everyone who worked on this, because I think, although we can turn various switches on and off and look at scenarios, I think we have a good starting point here. I think directionally the generation mix is good and makes sense to me when you think about the climate action plan, the objectives of reducing CO2, getting more renewables in the mix, but then also, making sure we have a reliable power source of supply. I think it all makes sense, and it kind of, since our focus was near term, like the next 5 years, it kind of rules out effectively a lot of new technologies. You alluded to, Reed, new technologies are coming, but when you think about what they are, on hydrogen or ammonia or green ammonia and all the rest of it, these are, or large-scale carbon capture, these tend to be things that are post 5 years from now in scale. So I think this is a very sensible mix to start with. I don't have a good feel, though, for how much risk we're taking on with these additional reliance on ERCOT purchases, versus spending capital or doing something else where, maybe we'd have less reliance there. But I think that point's been raised anyway. But that was the main thing that jumped out to me as an issue. But other than that, I think it's a sensible mix and a good starting point for looking at various scenarios based on the factors you've gotten here. I feel good about it.
Dee Dee?
Got it. Okay, I got it. I'm sorry. Apologize. I'm going to go back to our last meeting where we went around the room and you all took our thoughts and ideas, and we spent 3 hours in a meeting talking about what we would like to see in modeling in those scenarios. I said something to CPS, to the RAC to consider. I did suggest that we run maybe 10 scenarios, and that's based on like feedback that other members could get to give. I would like to see all clean energy resources, including distributed energy resources, rooftop solar, batteries, energy efficiency and demand. And we know that energy efficiency, based on the Brattle analysis, that's critical in our planning. Why did we spend 3 hours going around the room talking about this stuff if we're just looking at a natural gas conversion? Could we better spend our time just looking at all sources and forecasting versus just the backcasting? And I want to also point out that there is no transitional green gas. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas, so you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. So I think we need to get that out of our vocabulary. I also have a question about the CO2 emissions. Does this count for leakages, methane leakages during extraction, processing, and transportation? Because those could diminish the overall, beneficial impact of using natural gas.
The answer to your last questions is no, it doesn't. As far as the being able to control emissions and capture CO2, I still believe that's an improvement. You can call it whatever you want to, blue or green.
One
The
question
reason-
about that,
no, let me-
carbon
let me-
capture.
let-
No,
let-
because there is a question about carbon capture.
let me
Do we,
finish.
do we take into account that carbon capture is extremely expensive? Are we including those costs too?
No, it is very expensive. So let me finish. You asked several questions. I'm trying to get to them. So what I wrote down here is we went around the room and we asked, what do people want to see? And what we have here is what we wrote down, or what I wrote down, is all the different options. Did we turn them all off and on? No, but we can very clearly turn off and on multiple, and we intend to. The only reason that we went through this the first time is to get through it first before we start running off into some other direction. Yes, there's multiple options. We'll be more than happy to turn it off or on any way you'd like to see it. It is not just a natural gas option, or we wouldn't be buying 900 megawatts of solar. So, and we wouldn't be shutting down some gas plants, and we wouldn't be closing up coal. So, I just guess I just disagree with you on some of that. Go ahead, what's your next question? You got another minute or so?
No, that's all.
Okay.
So I do want to comment and appreciate, Dee Dee, you bringing us back to the conversation we had last time. And I do think it is important for us to look at forecasting, whether it's forward-looking assumptions, the different scenarios that we talked about at the last meeting, and we'll compile those. The plan is to bring them back and seek feedback again, make sure we're aligned on the different types of scenarios we want to look at. You know, the intent of what we were showing today was intended to be a backcast to look at how history would have turned out differently if we would have changed generation mix. There are a lot of different factors that need to be considered as we look forward and what the future may bring, you know, as far as different generation types. I think those types of assumptions and different types of generation, those are all different, I think, scenarios that we can look at and should look at as we move forward and have the conversation over the next few months. But today's conversation and the simulation we showed had a different purpose. It was meant to be, as I said, a first step kind of frame of reference on just illustrating for everybody what happens and what are some of the trade-offs as we make some of these decisions. Because as we look at that forecasting and the multiple scenarios, those trade-offs will start to get much more complex. And so we just wanted to start kind of with a foundation, and then we'll build from there.
Thank you.
Michael.
Thank you. This transition case results, it is a very good first step. So, but we would like to see the inner workings of the models in the future. I want to go back to the generation planning slideshow, but we don't have to put it up on the screen. But in that generation planning slideshow, there were some objectives. There was a laundry list of objectives, several of them. And my only question is, have those been weighted already? Have those objectives been weighted and put in some decision support tool, or is that the purpose or the job of this committee to weight those objectives for power generation? That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, to answer your question, no, we haven't weighted those, but we're looking for feedback on, what is important to you and the committee.
And they should be weighted, but that wasn't for us to do it. We need to get it from you. Okay. Is that all, Michael? Okay, go ahead. Oh. No? No questions? Okay. Jack?
Okay. This is a great model and a first start. I look at this and I see a 22% increase in cost over the historical period. And I think you've answered this, but I think it's important that we have the ability to look forward. Because looking forward at current pricing, this scenario might be 50% and a larger impact. And two, I think we need to be looking at capital scenarios as we go through this. So, looking at opportunities to buy new generation besides, say just buying wind from somebody or buying something from ERCOT. So I think we need to be careful just giving up all the ability to generate the power that we need. And that's all I had to say. Thanks.
Okay. Go ahead, Mary. No? No questions? Who's next? I can't see around. Michael, I'm sorry.
Mine's on.
Okay, the green light is on. Just have a couple questions, and perhaps I'm getting too deep into the model. I know Femi was suggesting maybe we don't go too deep into the model, but the first point, Jim had a good point asking about, how much of the capacity was this 900 megawatt solar compared to our total need, and doing that quick math, it's about 15%, but and maybe this is more of a comment than a question, but we also have to remember that 900 megawatts of capacity is only good for the daylight hours, so we still need that full capacity the rest of the day and on bad days. So I guess one of my questions would be, does this model, when we're adding in this solar, is it taking it into account that it's only going to be used during the daylight hours and we have to draw from other capacity sources the other 16 hours of the day or however many hours of the day we don't have effective solar?
Yes, it is. The solar is a daily profile, so it's going to, have the megawatt hours. Basically, it was actually hourly rolled up to daily, so it does account for those off hours where there's no sunlight.
Okay, great. And then my other question has to do with using this model, the increased reliance on the ERCOT market. I know we're assuming the historical values, and it's probably a good way to do it. But what I don't get a sense of is, crunching this scenario, are those new purchases great enough that it might have affected that ERCOT market by much? And I know we're not modeled for that. We're just assuming historic. But I don't know if these new purchases would have been a great enough percentage of the ERCOT market that we may have driven their prices up 10% or 20%.
Yeah, that's a good point. We didn't factor that in. We've had some internal discussion about that, saying, look, how far has this change got to go to affect the market prices and how many hours does it affect prices? And especially like Spruce 1 coal unit, 560 megawatts, switch it off. What effect would that have? So there is those effects for sure, and those are the kind of things I think a forward-looking model will be a little better suited to handle.
Okay, great. That's all I have. And by the way, I think the model is a great start, and it looks good. It'd just be nice to look under the hood a little bit more in the future.
Yeah, let me back up to a point you just made. You made it. I think Jack made it. Dana made it. It's been made 3 or 4 times. Dee Dee made it. But what we're trying to do here is understand the relationships in our portfolio. Once we understand the relationships in our portfolio, the next step is to do future price deck, okay? I mean, you just flip it, but unless you're comfortable with the relationships that we've got modeled here, then you're not, and the changes that we're looking at making, even if you apply a future price deck, it won't be right, and you won't understand it. So, I know we're all wanting to get there, but I'm trying to take it a step at a time. So, yes, we will do that, Michael. Okay. Dr. Cantu, I think you're next.
Yes, thank you very much for the information, very, very detailed work. And since I'm coming new into this, I'm just going to have one thought that relies on my previous knowledge about modeling and assumptions. So I would just ask, did CPS look at some of those structural issues where you made the assumption? So some of those structural issues sometimes that go into modeling can be biased in a way. And so just as you go forward, thinking about those relationships, I think that we've all been talking about in different models as well, are you bringing in all the information that would give us that relationship in those future modeling? So that's all I wanted to say, because I'm just going back to what I know about models and making assumptions.
Yeah.
We also have to be aware of some of those might be biased in some way as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, everything's not in there. For example, cost savings are not in there if you're shutting down plants. The question that, are we influencing the ERCOT market? Look, if we go forward on this, and we're still working on this, and you're going to have a model of ERCOT in relationship to us or you're going to get the wrong answer, because things are happening on ERCOT. So now all of a sudden we're projecting not only what we want to do, but what we think ERCOT's going to do, what prices are going to do, what the world's going to do, and pretty soon you've got a very complicated future forecast deck. And I think before we go there, we're here, and we're not perfect, absolutely. You're correct. Okay, I can't see who's next. Alan, go.
Okay, question on the transition case where solar, and because solar is subsidized, is heavily subsidized, will there be any pushback for the estimated, $100 million in lost revenue to the solar, to those people? Also, to Jim Berg's point, where if we're buying more, and we are, as you said, at an increased risk, how does that increased risk affect our bond rating?
We need,
I see Rudy coming up.
yeah, I see, we need someone to talk about the financial impacts here.
Use the mic there. Rudy, there's a mic there. Yeah, it's working now. Hit the button.
Testing,
There
testing.
you go.
So here's what I'd say about how our rating agencies kind of assess risk. We just are going through the process of getting our bond rating reaffirmed in advance of our regulatory asset deal in the market here in a couple of weeks. And I can tell you, to a rating agency, they are looking at the ERCOT market much more kind of significantly than even some of the decisions that we're making here at CPS Energy, because there's so much change right now. How generation's being valued, how ancillary services are being, priced in the market, what the future mix of our generation in ERCOT looks like. As we start the process of actually running models for the future, it's not just about what decisions we're making here at CPS Energy. It's also about what's happening in the market that's going to affect the market price. There's a ton of solar and wind coming in, planned in the market over the next, 4 or 5 years, that's going to impact whatever value of generation that we own, is ultimately going to be priced at. So yes, the ERCOT market risk is absolutely a consideration of our rating agencies, Al.
Thank you. Also, because we're not going to be generation long, do we really want to, I'll hold that question for another. Thank you.
Remember, sometimes we purchase fuel not because we're short, but because it's better to purchase it than it's generated. So let's understand there's two numbers in that power purchase number. If we see a situation where the grid drops down and it's really cheap because there's a lot of renewables coming on, a lot of times we'll purchase instead. So again, it's an imperfect number, and part of the process is understanding how imperfect the number is so we can improve it. And y'all are doing a really good job. So let's keep improving it. But you're right, Al, it does not include it.
So if you buy it cheap, what are you going to sell it to for a profit?
We're going to use it if we buy it cheap.
What I would add to that conversation is a couple things. The way this transition case worked is, yes, we would not be generation long because it just shows us closing Spruce 1 without adding any capacity to replace it. Whether that's whatever technology that is, gas generation, renewables, new technology that we've talked about that is on the horizon over the next X number of years, that assumption wasn't baked into this. I think that is a key conversation for us to have, is do we want to continue to be generation long? And it ties into the risks you asked about that Rudy talked about. There's valid considerations and value in being generation long. But we have to look at what that, how we do that and what the corresponding impact is to the bills. Transitioning, Dana, to your question, you're right, as you mentioned the wholesale revenue and the amount we made in 2018, 2019. Those years still show some purchases because there's hours of the day or months of the weeks of the year, right, where overnight prices may have been low and we may have bought overnight because it was cheaper to buy the power overnight than it would have been to generate with our own units. But then as you get into the heat of the summer, market prices come up, and we were selling that excess capacity to the market at a much higher price. So it's not really a direct trade-off. There will be times when it's advantageous for us to buy from the market, and obviously one of the benefits of having excess generation is that it allows us to have that length if we have a generating unit that decides it doesn't want to participate on a given day. But when all of our fleet is there and market prices move, we've effectively protected our customers, but we have that excess generation that we can sell to other people in ERCOT at a price. Again, in every dollar we collect from wholesale revenue is a dollar we're not collecting from folks here in San Antonio to pay for the operation of the utility.
Al, did you have another question?
Yes, sir. Also, how does that affect our community's ability to be for economic development, for attracting more businesses to come here? Us being less generation long, does that make us less attractive to those future employers?
Well, that's a big overall economic question. Again, the assumptions in this model, and we'll get Femi to look at it, and we'll get anybody else who wants to look at it. But if you remember, we're running a converted Spruce 2 like we are Summers. So we're not saying because we've converted that, we run that plant up, okay? We're kind of holding everything stable. A model like a lot of you are talking about would go through and dispatch those things up to some economic number. We're assuming that that economic number is the same as the Summers plants. I don't know if that's a good assumption or not. So there could be more capacity in here. If you look at those utilization numbers, even including the ancillary services, there might be more capacity in here we might use. But as long as we're tying to that price, we're having to make an assumption that we did it right. We're not going back and, in this particular case, saying let's review and see if we could have dispatched our units more effectively and more efficiently and more cost effectively. We didn't do that. We took them just like we did them, okay? All right.
What I would add from an economic development standpoint is I think a couple of the key attractions, if you will, are our ability to provide affordable and reliable power. So as we look at our generation planning efforts, I think part of that's helped us over the years has been the diversity of supply, right? We've got a diverse fuel supply that's helped us over the years. We have a diverse set of generation in terms of what we call base load all the way to peaking units. And so as we look at this effort, I think it's important for us to keep those kind of key pillars in mind about reliability and affordability. And if we're able to do that, as we work through this transition and how we address the closing of Summers units, the closing of Spruce units, and we keep that, are able to provide affordable and reliable power, I think that will continue to be a benefit as we look, from an economic development standpoint at attracting businesses and commercial customers to the area. So I think that has to be balanced as we look at, at ultimately bill impact, right? How it affects not only residential bills, but what we're able to do and provide to our commercial customers as well.
Andy, I guess you're next. No? Peter?
Thank you, Reed. There's a scripture that's appropriate for the success of CPS and the RAC, and it's this: in the counsel of many, there is success. And that's why this exercise is so important. I'd like to thank you, Rudy, and the CPS staff and management for working with us to provide this power generation model. I know you have to balance confidentiality and transparency in working with us. And this model is another great example of how providing us with technical tools and information better informs our decision-making as recommendations to the board. Reed, I'd like to thank you for your leadership and courage to take a position and push the envelope in providing us with help in meeting this charge. Well, based on the results of the model, I believe your initial starting point recommendation is on point. It's a great starting point. It can't be underestimated that the power generation decisions that we're making are critical to the future success of CPS and the greater San Antonio community. In light of the resolution that was recently passed by the board, I humbly caution the CPS board and management to reassess the current cap commitment timelines and take a slow, measured approach to clean energy generation planning decisions. The failed energy policies of the city of Georgetown, the state of California, and the nation of Germany should be omens to your decision-making process. The wrong energy policy decisions will jeopardize the future of CPS, the city, and the most vulnerable of our community will suffer the worst. I pray for wisdom and discerning good counsel for each of you and each of us, my fellow RAC members. And my only question is specifically related to what the timeline would be for the power generation decisions that are here before us. I know there was a date of by the end of the year, Rudy, that we're talking about delivering on some information, and for the planning purposes of the RAC, just to understand where we're going in the next few meetings.
Yeah, great question, Peter. I'll tell you that the board and I are talking about what the process looks like to get to December. Obviously, the RAC's work is hugely important. Whether or not they make a decision in December or, a few months after that, I think is up to the board. But there's a process. Here's my process, for trying to be responsive to my board. I'm going to show them as many views of the world as I possibly can, as many perspectives on what the future looks like, whether we're going to continue to be an operator or whether we're going to, contract for power, whether or not we should have some transitional, plants. I mean, there's so many factors that will drive our success going forward. And I want them to see every option available to us so that they can make an informed decision, because this is the decision to make that's going to, put CPS Energy on the trajectory into the future. So the more information, the better. But we'll be kind of doing some similar work with the board that we're doing here. I can't just present them with the RAC recommendation in December and expect them to be ready to make the call. I've got to constantly be feeding them information between now and then, so they're thinking about the same things you're thinking about and are ready to make a call whenever they're ready to make a call. But I'm hoping by December they'll have as much information as we can get to them to begin those deliberations.
Thank you, Rudy. That's all I've got.
Thank you, Rudy. That's really important what Rudy just said. And let me just put an exclamation mark on it. If you look at, let's just say 5 years from 2023, that's 2028. And if you go back and look at your Flex Power Bundle book, there's a couple of expenditures in there that are not insignificant. One you just saw here is, I think they showed it here at 58. Earlier, I think it was 68. But there's also a SCR on Spruce 1, and that's going to be a much bigger expenditure. So, we are needing to move forward. We do have some very timely things, because an SCR, y'all can correct me, but it could be $125 million. I don't know, but I put them on cat crackers. They're not that big, but it's big. I mean, it's a lot of expense. So we do have to move. And that puts a lot of burden on y'all, and I apologize for that. It means you've got to get a feel for this, discuss it, get an understanding of where we've been, and then pretty quickly we're going to have to move forward to where you think we need to go. So thank you, Peter, for that, and Rudy, that was very good. Thank you. Okay, did Councilwoman Villagrán, is she sitting somewhere else, or no? Okay, go ahead, John.
Okay, well, thank you. It's hard to follow Peter, but I will say a thank you to our chair, who really has been so patient in talking to all of us. I know most of us have had offline conversations with him, and even when you and I have disagreed vehemently, you've never been disagreeable. So that's a commendation to your leadership. I also want to commend you, because it was really the chair's idea to do this look backwards so that we can have a meaningful conversation about where we're going forwards. I also want to commend the CPS staff for producing this model in record time so that we can have at least a basis of where to go to. It is imperfect at best. Anytime you're doing models, that's the way it works. But as we're going into the next phase, which is really the crux of what we've been asked to do here as a RAC, and that is to figure out how we're going to not only generate power for ourselves, but ultimately, what does that do to the ratepayer in San Antonio? It is a dollars and cents question at the end of the day, because that's what pays for it. To Dee Dee's point, I think last time when we were able to talk for a long period of time, I like this format where we're able to talk amongst ourselves and actually trade ideas out there, because as we go into the next phase of this, that is really the glass ball that we're looking at and trying to figure out how are we going to go forward and what is that going to cost and who's going to pay for that. The only thing, and it may be in all the materials that were here, I've asked for this before, but I think it's an important slide for us to look at, is what is the CO2 emission that CPS generates into the San Antonio metro area compared to everything else? What is that percentage? I don't know what that is. I think, Rudy, you and I have talked about this a little bit. I don't know if we have that in the material that was sent out.
I think they're working, and Councilman Sandoval can correct me, I think they're working to update that for last year, isn't that right? In the CAP committees, aren't they working to update the CO2 inventory?
Yes, we are updating the inventory. What I will tell you, John, is that buildings, what is labeled as buildings for energy consumption, takes up about half of that whole inventory of greenhouse gases.
Number I just saw was about 44%.
Commercial buildings, is that what you're saying? Or does that include residential too?
Commercial buildings in general. Yeah.
Buildings in general.
Okay. If we can just get that breakdown, because I think it's going to be meaningful for us when we're talking about, I think one of the prime objectives here is obviously to reduce the carbon footprint. I think that's what we're trying to aim at. I think we need to have that number to begin with so that we understand what percentage CPS can actually change of that overall number within the cap, if I understand that correct. Can we have that for the next time? All right, thank you. And again, my commendations to CPS for coming up with these numbers and to our leadership. Thank you.
Just one point of clarification, John. What I heard the councilwoman say was that the consumption of that energy generation was in buildings was half. Were you talking about the consumption side or the production side? So I don't know if the cap does something on a production side if you look at all the sources of CO2 and what's the relationship of the CPS plants as sources versus all other sources. I don't know that. Where does the cap do that?
No, the cap will only calculate emissions created in the city of San Antonio boundary. At this point, it does not yet. So it would tell us what CPS creates in-house.
Yeah.
But for instance, if we have a plant that's not part of CPS that we're purchasing from, those emissions are not included.
Thank you. That's very helpful. But at least our plants around Dealey and here in town, those would be in the source point comparisons, I assume. Okay, we have more time now, so we'll start back around again. Anita? We have about 20 minutes, so just to let you know where we are, we have 19 minutes.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. You know, I want to go back to a question that I asked in the beginning to Mr. Kossib, just to kind of straighten it out in my mind. You know, and my question specifically is over the total cost in the historical column. I guess that's $2 billion, and then versus the total cost in the transition case, which is like $457 million. Will you explain the difference between those two numbers? I mean, just the basics of it.
Yeah, sure. So the historical $2 billion number, the total cost for the 4 years, you would take that and then add on top of that the $457 million. So it's a delta. It's an additional cost or an incremental cost as compared to your baseline.
Thank you very much. And I just feel like that needs to be made a little bit more clear when we move forward. I will also say, you know, Reed, thank you for for initiating this, looking back through history. I do think it is very useful. It's a very useful exercise. I mean, I think one of the things that I just want to comment on, think about, and it's been going around the room, is, you know, for lack of a better term, the silver bullet would be, you know, on-grid, clean power at a fixed cost, you know. But it's you know, that's going to lower our risk to ERCOT, and, you know, new generation technology, you know, we want to believe that it will lower our fuel cost. So I guess for me, those are just some of the things that I'm thinking about, you know, how we're going to, you know, transition from this and do a deeper dive and looking into this model, and how we're going to move forward and start projecting generation scenarios.
Okay, thank you. Jim?
Yes, this is for Rudy. Rudy, are you satisfied with the political, with what Austin, what the legislature, what has been done to fix what happened with Storm Erie to the whole grid? How comfortable are you with, here we are a year later?
What I'll say is that we made it through this winter, you know, with reliability pretty much intact. We did see some gas price fluctuations, which, you know, lead to some supply, you know, questions, and I still think there's work to do. The Railroad Commission isn't regulating the natural gas companies the way, PUC is regulating the electric utilities, and so I do believe that will be a topic of discussion for the next legislative session. We need to do more. There's a lot of work the PUC is doing right now that's creating huge structural changes to the ERCOT market that also bears risk for us, that we're trying to get our arms around. And, you know, Kathy Garcia and our team up in Austin are right, I mean, they're on top of it, but there's a lot of unknowns that we're going to know more, you know, over the next couple of years. But some of them are intuitive, and some of them are not so intuitive, and they're driving prices in the market up beyond maybe where, you know, higher than they should be. So there's work to do on both the natural gas supply side and in how ultimately the market shakes out. But I do believe that strictly from a reliability standpoint, ERCOT's taken a lot of actions that made the system more reliable this winter. But I can tell you, we had some natural gas supply issues during that last cold snap, and so I know that other utilities had the same experience.
Dana?
Yes, thank you. And I just want to make sure that CPS and the committee is aware of possible and pending changes at the Public Utility Commission in Austin, because there will be some, I don't know what all they're going to be, but there are going to be some big changes and that will affect CPS. Peter brought up a good point too about, for instance, Germany, and I've said many times that we need to sort of take lessons from, and Georgetown, from what has happened before, to maybe put that in the model to make sure we don't make the same kind of mistakes. I have family and friends and even some clients in Europe, and for years I've talked about the situation in Germany and the UK. For a little background, you know, they adopted a green policy in Germany years ago and started closing all the coal plants, the nuclear plants, put up windmills and solar farms. Their energy costs tripled, and they became dependent on Russian gas, 40%. And the wolf is at the door, so to speak. And so you know what they did last week? The new chancellor said, listen, we're going to burn gas, we're going to burn coal, we're going to restart our nuclear program, we're going to forget the green stuff, and we're going to build up the German army. $92 billion would make them the third largest military in the world. Now that's a big change, and maybe the climate change was in Ukraine, but we need to remember these things about the safety and integrity of our own system here. I mean, it's the same economics. Thanks.
Thank you, Dana. Okay, we have been joined by Councilwoman Villagrán. She didn't get her first round, so if we could break here for just a minute and give her the courtesy of asking her questions.
Thank you. I did look over, but I have no questions at this time.
Okay, that's quick. Okay, Femi?
I'm going to come back to the need to see the inner workings of this model. I say that because even from the first round of questions, we've begun to ask ourselves.
Okay, well, okay, we got something that's starting to come up here as kind of a reoccurring theme, and that is that people want to spend more time with the model. And I don't see a problem with that unless I'm violating some rule in the bylaws, and then I'm sure somebody will tell me pretty quickly. If you've got a group, if we have a subgroup, a team, a working group, I don't care what you call it, but we got 21 people here. It's pretty hard to take a model apart with 21 people. I mean, there's just not enough room under the hood. And so we're going to have to figure out if there's, 3, 4, or 5 folks that want to volunteer to do that, then I'd be willing to, if I'm not violating some rule somewhere, take volunteers that want to spend more time with this model, and obviously it's going to have to be flipped around and taken forward. There's no pride of authorship here with anybody standing up here on this model, so we don't have a problem with it. So if somebody, if you want to do that, raise your hand now. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I got 6, right? Done. Thanks. Go on. Who's next? Kurt?
Well, I think I've said my piece already. Maybe add a little color on the point Dana made about Europe. I just got back actually from Europe in connection with an LNG company I'm involved with, and we met with Germans who, tragically, there's really been a kind of a revolution in thinking in Europe in the last 20 days. And it's not that green is being set aside, not at all. The green investments are critical to meet the climate goals of Europe and the world. However, the meetings I had were for how fast can you get us to basically gas import terminals, regasification terminals, and I asked about the 8-kilometer pipeline that had to be built, and I said, can we get it permitted in Germany? And they said, done. So basically, I mean, that's literally 180 degrees different from an answer you would have gotten 22 days ago. And so, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, my personal opinion on all this is that, we need an addition. It's not even a transition. It's addition. We need everything. We need all the investment in renewables we can get. And I think, at least for now, one of the big carbon reduction benefits is going to be more gas to Europe to replace coal. That's probably the biggest single reduction in the world that you can, do in the next few years on emissions. But anyway, it's just, I listened to your point about Europe, and I just had some direct input on that, so I thought I'd share it.
Thank you, Kurt. Dee Dee.
Everybody kind of worked it out. Everybody said they didn't have any more questions.
Oh, all right, is that okay? That's why you're standing there. All right, Al, go ahead. I'm catching on, but it's slow.
Regarding the goal of zero emissions, the cost versus zero emissions versus global target of zero emissions, there have been some RAC emails regarding renewables, and they're not all that favorable on renewables in showing the total cost of what it costs to get renewables here and how we dispose of that technology at the end of life. But I haven't seen any opposite point of view to validate or to justify the political will to go so green. Is there, can we, I mean, is there no opposition to not going solar? I mean, and I'll remind everyone that nuclear is zero CO2 emissions. Why can't we do more of that?
Okay. Okay, we're coming on around. Councilwoman?
I just wanted to say that with the committee that's looking into the model, while I can't join the committee, anything that you need from, I think, the other members in terms of input, I'd like for you guys to ask during the process. So that's my only comment. Thank you.
John? Okay, we're 5 minutes ahead. We got a group that's going to work on the model, and now we're going to go to the STEP program. Thank you very much, John. Really appreciate everything that you and Galen did, and it's just been a lot of work. And Kevin, you've helped. I mean, you've given them. They're your folks, and you supported them, and thank you very much for that. So now we're going to talk about the STEP model, STEP program.
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you.
That's okay. While Rick's walking up to lay out the presentation, I just want to explain kind of where we are and where we're heading with this conversation and why it's so important for us to get the REC's. You know, STEP has been a hot button topic for as long as I've been at CPS Energy. And, you know, our board has asked very specific questions about kind of, you know, the performance of STEP in the past. The report that you see there was our attempt to answer those questions, which, you know, for the most part, we've done. We'll be happy to set up another work session if you're interested, if for anybody interested in digging into that Brattle report, to talk about, you know, kind of some of the findings. What we're really wanting to talk about is the future. Over the next several board meetings, we will be presenting, you know, a process for the board to consider, you know, scale and, you know, scope and what type of programs, what's the goal of our future energy efficiency program, which we're not even going to call STEP going forward. We'll come up with a new, fresh program if the board decides they want to proceed with it. But we will present options to the board as to what a future program could look like, including no program at all. And we're going to present those same options to this committee. So as you know, kind of deliberate on this topic, I wanted you to recognize we're talking about the future. You know, we've kind of buttoned up, you know, what we've accomplished at STEP. STEP will end in July. You know, so, and there's likely to be a gap in there in terms of services while we are trying to get the new program, if there is one, up and running. But your input is really important on this topic, and it will inform the board as they deliberate on this issue as well. It is clearly a charge of this committee to weigh in on this, and you know, and I just encourage you to tell us what you think. Thank you.
Well, first of all, Rudy, I want to thank you for making that introduction. From our earlier discussions, that was just pretty much what I was going to say. Just to set the stage, we're not going to build a program, okay? We're going to look at programs that are brought to us. We're not going to spend a lot of time, like Rudy said, on the past. That's the reason you've got the documents there, and I do think we have to get our mindset that we're going to be looking at something that's being brought to us and giving our input. It's a different approach, okay? So get there, and thank you, Rudy, for saying that. That was absolutely point on. Okay. I will turn it over to Rick, and I get to sit down.
All right, thank you, Reed. Let me get situated here. Okay, all right. Good afternoon. My name is Rick Luna. I'm a Director of Technology and Product Innovation for CPS Energy. And as Rudy said, I'm going to frame up the discussion for the future of the STEP program, what we used to call the STEP program. And I'm going to cover a couple of areas with you this afternoon. I am going to talk a little bit about the history of the program, just because we think it's germane to how we think about, you know, what we're going to do going forward. And so we'll just spend a little bit of time on that. talk a little bit about the current programs that we offer, and then we're going to switch over and start talking about cost effectiveness. I'm going to touch a little bit about the Brattle report that Rudy mentioned, that we commissioned, that we presented to our board at our last meeting. And then we're going to talk about our approach for how we move forward. And we've got some concepts we want to share with you. This is really where we want your feedback. As Rudy said, this is the start of a conversation with you. We're going to come back, but we want you to be thinking at a high level about an approach that we've been talking about publicly, and get your feedback on that. So Rudy covered a lot of this. As we think about a new program, fundamental to this is the community support, the support of stakeholders. Ultimately, we need the board to approve it, and then we need the city council to approve it. So without all of this consensus, we can't have a program come July. And so, we understand, Rudy said it, the program should be forward-looking, right? It should reflect the technologies, the challenges, the opportunities of the future, and not be the same old thing, right? We have an opportunity to pivot, and we should take that opportunity. That said, we do believe these programs create value. We're going to talk a little bit about cost effectiveness. That's really to say that, the long-term value from these programs, when you look at the capacity value, the avoided costs that we are able to achieve, those are greater than our cost to run the programs, and so it's a net positive over the long term. Of course, there is a short-term cost to these programs, and we'll get a little bit into that. But we think in net, it's a positive for the community. Obviously, these programs lower emissions because we don't have to generate the power. They help our customers save energy and save money, which they tell us is critical. So as I mentioned earlier, we'll be back. We're going to seek your feedback, but this is the starting point. We wanted to sort of put these things on the table just so you know kind of how we're thinking about the development of the program. So what we have here is a timeline. We shared this with the board at their last meeting. And of course, like any timeline, it evolves, and this, of course, can evolve as well. But this is how we see sort of, this process of engaging with the community, and then of seeking support or approvals from the board and the council. And what it shows is, just starting from the end, the STEP program as it currently operates is done through an ordinance which the city council approved. We actually had an extension that they gave us, about an 18-month extension last year. That runs out on July 31st. So without affirmative vote or action, the programs would end at that point. So working backwards from that deadline, we have started the conversations. We presented the Brattle report to the board in February. We met with the CAC in March. Of course, today we're meeting with you, and we'll continue to have these engagements with the community. All of this driving towards a decision here in the next several months ahead of that July timeframe. Okay, so with that, as I said, I will talk a little bit about the history of STEP, just to reorient for folks who maybe weren't here, or it's been a while. It was back in May of 2009 that our board and the city council both approved the creation of the STEP program. At that time we talked about it as the fifth fuel, right? So we were looking to diversify our generation mix, create an opportunity to do these programs at large scale. Now we had been doing energy efficiency, back in 2001, 2002, but they were small programs, very limited size programs. This really represented a commitment to do it, big, right? And so we got approval from everyone to do a 771 megawatt goal. So that was a community goal that was set with a budget of up to $849 million. Really, this was aligned with how we were thinking about the future. This was part of our Vision 2020 goals, and it was aligned with the city of San Antonio had the Mission Verde initiative, which was looking to how do you spur local green jobs. And so all of this kind of came together to create the STEP program. So what STEP did was set a broad goal. Now, it was not prescriptive. It really gave us the freedom, CPS, gave us the freedom to create this program, and really from scratch. And so what we've done on this chart is to try to show you that evolution over time. And so if you look at the very top row, again, we were authorized for $849 million in total. You can see there, we were building these programs as we went along. And so the first year we spent $11 million, second year 20, and then it kept growing, right? We were bringing in programs. So the first year we had 13 programs. Slowly we started adding more. We were also taking programs out, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a while. There were programs that didn't really take off, and technology changed, and so we retired programs along the way. Technology changed. In the early days, we did a lot of CFL light bulb discounts. That was state of the art at that time. You might have gone to H-E-B, gotten a coupon, you got a bulb, you could have got it for free, I think, at one point. You know, we stopped doing that because LEDs came along, and so this evolution of technology, because we had the freedom and the flexibility under the ordinance, we could adapt to that and incorporate things as they went along. You'll see solar shows up later. You'll see some things, demand response grew over time. I think this is an important part of that story that we want to frame up for you here today. So the end result of that was the programs that we have today. This is what we offer currently. You can see we cover everything from weatherization. We've got energy efficiency programs for residential and commercial customers. We've got our solar programs, electric vehicle programs here recently. We just started last year a couple of programs there, and then demand response. And so to do this, we have a number of partners who help us and help deliver these programs to our customers. Okay, so enough about the past. I want to transition to talk about cost effectiveness and the performance of the programs. I want to make sure you understand or you know that when we were given the authority to create STEP, we also were given some accountability procedures, and we worked with the city staff to develop these. They wanted to make sure to track, where the rebates were going, dollars, numbers of rebates by council district, how much we were spending. All of that is contained in reports that we provide the city, the quarterly reports and annual reports. And what you see there is an image of our latest annual report. There should be a copy that was provided to you. We submit these every year. And what we do is we basically have a third party come in, validate that what we claim as savings is in fact occurring. And they do sampling, they do estimations, they evaluate the saving claims that we put together, and then they help us look at the cost of the programs to determine, was it cost effective. All of these are publicly available. They're on the city's website. There's a link there, and we encourage you, if you're interested, to go and check those out. And they're archived, so they're all the way back to the very beginning. So I just want to touch on this very lightly. So how do we know that the savings are real? We get that question all the time. And we rely on statistics, right? Statistics, we run models, we look at lots of customer data, millions and millions of intervals of customer data to evaluate a program, determine that the savings are actually in fact occurring. This is a very simplified example from our demand response program. So if you think of a thermostat on a hot day, 100 degrees, we will deploy the thermostats in the community. We've got 150,000 of them. They will reduce load, right? And we know that because we track all the meter data, right? And so we build models that help us compare what happened, right? So the actual load on a given day with an estimation of what would it have been had we not called the program. And this is a simplified, example, but you basically see a divergence, so we can say that these programs, the gap between the two lines is the savings that this program created during the time interval that we called the deployment. So this is a simple example. It gets a lot more complicated because if you change out an air conditioner, window, all kinds of other things, it gets a lot more complicated because weather gets involved and the weather can, mess up the data a little bit. But that's where the statistics come in. And again, we use a third party to help us sort it all out At the end of the day, program by program, we're estimating our avoided energy and our avoided capacity in a given day and in a given year.
This is the entire test program together?
Yes. Well, no, this is one program. This is illustrative. We do this program by program.
Or what program is that?
This is our demand response program.
Okay. And that's installing
Thermostats, right.
That's the only thing it does.
So basically, well, we've got varieties of demand response programs. What I'm really, this is an illustration of a thermostat on an afternoon. When we deploy it, right, we see a reduction versus what would have occurred had the thermostat not deployed, right?
And you have data on weatherization, solar?
Yes, for every program. Yep. Yeah. And again, that's it. That's in the report that we provided you of the M&V for the last year. Yep.
So let me talk about those reports that we gave you. You've got the Frontier report. That's the base report. It's pretty current. It was November of last year. It came in. A lot of the data that Brattle used, they actually pulled out of the Frontier report. So if you got time to look at some, I would look at the Frontier report. I really recommend that. There's, right now, I think you told me there's like 33 programs operating now. 20-ish. At some point in time, I was told Monday that during this process, off and on, we had 50-something different programs operating, okay? And remember, this does not go through the rate. This just after somebody spends money, they send the bill to CPS. CPS runs it through the fuel adjustment, collects the money, and pays it off. So it is a reimbursement. Go ahead.
I have a question on that. You said you got the authority to do this. Who did you get the authority to do it?
The city council approved it.
And of course, CPS pays for all this?
No, the citizens pay for all this. You pay for it, Dana.
Did you ask the citizens if they wanted it?
At the time, I did ask several citizens, but at the time, it was a program that was going to eliminate building a power plant, and you were going to invest in the community. Yes, and by the way, full disclosure, I voted for it. But I voted for one or two programs, which were the energy efficiency program. It has grown to programs that are unbelievable. And I'll just tell you, one of them is we subsidize variable speed pumps for people's swimming pool. Come on. Now, I'm going to turn it back to Rick, but I just wanted to get this control. I don't know if there's legal opinion, but the city, no, but I'm the one that voted for it. I'll tell you, I voted for it, and the city council approved it. I don't think there has to be. If we want to set up an ordinance to do something, we did it. That's right. That's right. Because in the end, remember, no, there is a big difference. But the point is that this is a cost-through system, okay? This is a cost-through system. So everything that is a cost item, okay, it goes back to the ratepayers. Goes all the way through, okay?
I apologize for the interruption, Reed, but we do have an agenda, and I want to make sure that we get through it today. So thank you.
Okay. So we will continue the slides here. Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. You know, we talked about how we estimate savings. So then, you know, once you've estimated savings, you know, you have to value. How do you value those savings? We have avoided cost figures, so we know the value of a kilowatt hour. We know the value of a kW of reduced capacity. John Kossab and his team work with us to put an estimation of the dollars that are saved through these programs. We compare that to the cost, and that gives us a ratio. We call it the UCT. This is a comparison of what did it cost us to run the programs versus the benefits that were created from the program. If you get a score greater than 1, that means that your payback is positive, right? Better than 1. And these are just some scores that show our programs. Out of the report that we shared with you, these are the scores for the last year. So you also got a copy of the Brattle report. There's a section in there where they talk about cost effectiveness. We asked them to look at this because it was a question from our board. They validated the view that we use, which is this utility cost test. They validated, said, you know, that looks right, and we went through the numbers. They did a secondary evaluation, something called a total resource cost, that's a little bit of it's an indicator, it's a different indicator, looking at from the customer's perspective, is there value in these programs? And they came back and their results, these are Brattle slides, I point you to the full deck, they're in there. And if you look there, they looked at this as well. Their results showed that, again, positive overall. They did point out that, some performed better than others. They were very high on our demand response program in that it has very low cost to customers, but very big benefits in terms of load reduction. Solar performed a little less because solar is more expensive, and when you compare it to the benefits, it does result in a lower score from this perspective. So I think it's useful as another way of looking at the value of these programs. So let me now pivot to the last portion where we talk about the future. And here really is to Rudy's point, we want your feedback on this, right? We've talked about this. This is not a new slide. We've had this concept of the future program should be a combination of proven programs that are working in terms of engaging customers, helping them save energy, save money, and so we continue some proven programs while at the same time we bring in some new approaches, right, that can assist us with helping vulnerable customers, encouraging innovation. We know new technology is coming. How do we incorporate that into the portfolio going forward? And sort of the combination of the two, we think, makes for a dynamic program that allows us to continue that evolution that we talked about earlier. And so what could that look like? And this is for conversation. These are not decisions. This is something we're putting up here, and we want your feedback. I mentioned before, we have retired programs before. This is not a new concept. Either something didn't work or the technology changed, and we phased it out, right? And it made sense to do so. As we look ahead, we think that there are some programs that are near maturity, and or the technology is changing. And so potentially there is an opportunity to look at those mature programs and potentially ramp those down, over time. We mentioned here, our traditional solar rebate programs. Our rebate has been declining every year. We've sort of reduced it, and as we've reduced it, activity has continued to increase. So we think there's an opportunity potentially there to phase those out and basically let those be self-sustaining. LED lighting discounts. We've done a lot of lighting in the community. Maybe the dollars are better spent in a newer technology. The costs have come way down again. Adoption has really, sort of become self-sustaining. And so then where do you focus, right? Well, we've got some proven programs up here that we think, drive some value. And then there's some new innovative opportunities, right, that we would grow. We've put up here some focus areas potentially. Again, we want your feedback on this. It could be equity-focused programs. It could be energy education programs. We know electric vehicles are coming in large quantities. Battery storage, energy storage is coming. So we put these up here as conversation starters there. And so we ran an RFP last year. You might have heard about it. We put out a solicitation for ideas, and we asked companies to bring us proposals for innovative technologies that are not currently in our portfolio. And we got 61 responses, and our team has been evaluating those. This is a summary sheet of what some of those are. And again, this is for your consideration, what some of those new programs that we could grow into, what those could be. It's not to say we're going to do everything here. I think this is more to show you what some of the ideas out there in the industry are. And once we sort of narrow down some focus areas, we would start to select some of these and eventually grow these into the portfolio. So this is my last slide. I mentioned earlier, these programs do help us over the long term save money. They are cost effective, but there is a cost in the immediate term, right? These programs cost money, and as Reed pointed out, ultimately our customers, see these costs on their bill. And so what we've got here is a set of options for discussion around what is the scale of the program. Traditionally, we have spent about $64 million on average over the last 10 years or 12 years. And so what would this cost our customers? And so you could see the ranges there as low as $1.75 a month in the third column for a $35 million a year program, up to $5 a month. And this is for residential customers based on their average usage. So we show this because this is a key part of the conversation is, what is the appetite for the scale of the program? And we certainly welcome your feedback on your perspectives on that. When we've asked customers in our customer surveys, they've told us $3 to $5 is kind of the area where the most folks are comfortable. Not to say everyone, but more folks are comfortable in the 3 to 5 range per month. And so I think that's my last slide. So I think we're going to go to questions. Ann, we lose Ann. There you are. Okay.
All right, we're going to use the same process, starting over there and just moving around.
Great, thank you so much. Rick, excellent presentation. Thank you for going over that with us. I guess I have kind of a comment, and Mr. Chairman, you could probably speak to this since you were sitting in that seat back in 2009, 2010. But I think that one of the things that I like to think about is that this was, and I was there at that time, that this was a much more cost-effective strategy. I remember, and his name was Scott Smith, and he was one of the old vice presidents of CPS Energy at the time, and the discussion is like, oh no, we need more power. And that power at like 771 megawatts, and this is where I wanted to ask a clarification question, and Rudy may know this, but I think that cost in 2009, 2010 dollars was estimated to be like 1.2 or 1.3 billion dollars to acquire that amount of power. So Mr. Smith's team, or CPS Energy, came up with this idea, at the time was very innovative, to come up with the fifth fuel, and that was to avoid building a new power plant and acquiring that power, that we would spend $849 million to get 771 megawatts of power instead of $1.2, $1.3 billion, and I believe those were in 2010 dollars. So I guess moving forward, it makes sense to reorganize STEP based on all of those lessons learned. But if you want to just talk a little bit, I think people forget that this all began because it was a cost-effective strategy, and also the value that it brings to the customer and the amount of bill impact and so on. So thank you.
Yeah. Let's be careful with what we're doing here and make sure we all understand. When this is presented, we did think we were going to have to build another plant because we just stopped the nuclear project, and we had just paid off $400 million on that deal, right? So people were a little nervous about jumping out and building a new plant. It was presented to us very clearly that we're going to invest in our customers, we're going to invest in our community instead of build something that's a power plant. We were going to do it over time, so just simple discounting. And it was, as my remembrance, was $800 million, and we were going to do it over 10 or 12 years. So if you spread that out over 10 or 12 years, and you bring that, discounting, obviously, at any rate, is going to give you a better option if you got the savings, okay? The problem that I saw as it went on, and I'm probably speaking out of turn here, and I'm speaking too long. The problem was it became a program for everything, okay? And it changed, and it kept changing. Now, I'm not being critical of that. That's just what happened, and there were opportunities because you ran out of CLCs, you needed you need different kind of bulbs, all these kind of things changed. Today, we're talking about the future. So the question that we're going to run around the room here for is, what do you want to see in the future, not what we did in the past, okay? We're here to give them input from the community of what you see going forward would be important in this. Going forward, what do you see? Come on, Rick. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I'm with you. I think, again, to clarify, the reason why I make that point is because I feel like that people have forgotten that point. I think it's important to understand that because moving forward, the question is, are we going to continue to invest on avoided generation, and will that work moving forward? So for me, that's really the big overarching question, not what happened in the past, but why did we do it, and are we going to do that in the future?
And so your point is, you'd like to see avoided generation as an item. Is that correct?
Into the mic, I can't hear you.
What I think you're saying,
Yeah.
Anita, is you would like to see it, going forward, avoid generation, investment in generation. Is that what you said?
Well, no, what my question was is to either one of you expand on, that savings opportunity, how well it's worked. I mean, again, that's why we started doing it.
Yeah.
And so to understand that so that we can frame it moving
Yeah.
forward. So it's really about, that this was a cost-effective strategy, and then your thoughts, especially Rick, about how that's going to play out moving forward.
Quickly, I think it did, and you can read the reports in Frontier and the rest of the places. I think it did pay out. But the future is, and Rick can talk about this, but what we're looking for here is what do y'all see in the future? Yes, some, no, this, not that, okay? That's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is, in our modeling of the future, when we think about, our demand, our demand for power, right? We have built STEP into the future, right? And so we make assumptions that these programs continue, and when we've done that, because we're trying to estimate, today, what's going to happen. So if you didn't do the STEP program, then it does change our supply forecast for the future, right? And so you've got to make up for that, and so you need more generation, right? So I don't know if that answers your question.
I'm going to put you down that you want to keep avoiding building plants. Is that a fair thing to say or not?
Well, I think it's a leap forward. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that again, kind of the point that I was trying to make is, I guess, really asking the question is, doubling down on we did it because it was a cost-effective strategy. We assume that strategy worked. The customers like it.
Right.
And do you see that is a good option for us moving forward? And so, yeah, I mean, that whole line of logic follows.
That's your answer. I don't know. I'm not running this thing. He is.
Okay, I think one thing that Anita fails to mention is the fact that, yes, okay, we saved $300 million over 10 years. But at the end of the 10 years, we don't have a power plant, which you would have had, and you would have had 30 more years of it, perhaps. So that's just a de facto fact. Second thing that I would say is that I'm kind of in the Ed Kelly column. Paying our customers to be our competitors just somehow loses me. Paying our customers to not use our power, which we're selling, they are free to go out and not use our power. Go put those solar panels on your roof. I bless you. Bless you. But they're going to also go away because they have a time elapse, and then you're going to have to replace them. Are you asking CPS to replace them as well? I just have problems competing with myself, and it's just a business thing in me. I have enough problems with my competitors without competing with myself.
Those are really good points, and just let me talk about the two things. One, not having a plant. You're absolutely right. We don't have a plant. But the money that's put in to energy conservation doesn't go away. It keeps generating. And we don't have to maintain it, okay? We don't have to staff it. So while we're not putting an asset on our books, we're also not putting some expenses. So there are some trade-offs there with it that are interesting on that. Dana?
Can I add a little? Oh, yeah, if I could add a little to that. I mean, I think the other perspective on that is, ultimately our customers are our owners, and what we're doing is helping them reduce waste, right? And so, we talk to customers all the time who, we nudge them into, changing some equipment out, and they do it, and, their bill goes down 10%. And so I think, we need to not lose sight of that fact, is that, they're still doing the same work, they're still doing all the same things. It's just that now they don't have to waste 10% of the energy to do it. And so I just think that's the other side of the coin on that.
Dana.
Well, to continue along this line, I've looked through these Brattle reports, and I'm not sure I agree that it's been a success. It just doesn't look like it to me. And the example I give by the data that CPS has given this committee, for instance, 60% of the STEP money goes towards solar rebates or something like that. Am I correct in that?
Much less than that. Today, it's probably...
well, not today, but over time.
Even over time.
Somebody sent around a report. It had it broken down as a percentage of the money a STEP went to these various programs. And that report said 60% went to solar.
No, it's something like 10 to 20%. It's pretty fairly distributed.
Okay. Well, I'm sort of in the camp of like what Jim just said. If you're saving money by paying somebody to take your business, and it's not CPS paying, remind you, it's the other customers, and even if they want to do it, so you're reducing revenues and therefore demand by paying somebody to take it. I don't see how that saves you any money in the long run. And you say it helps you lower the cost of generation. How?
Well, a simple example is, when you pay your bill, you pay an average bill. And so let's say that's 11 cents a kilowatt hour. That's not our cost to generate at all hours, right? There are hours where it costs us a lot more than that to generate the power. And so, for example, with our demand response program, what we're doing is targeting the hours of highest demand or of highest prices, right? And so we will deploy our programs 250 megawatts in the summer to reduce our need for power at that time. And so that's one way we generate savings, right, is not needing to avoid or to generate or buy power at high price times. That's one example. There are others. For example, there are days in the summer where we can save on transmission costs because we reduce our need for power at the ERCOT peak. And that's big dollars. And we do that every summer with our programs, is reduce that peak. And we have a department that's what they do. They forecast it, they deploy our programs, and we generate savings. If you read the report, we break all of those down. All of the different savings categories are quantified so that you can sort of get a picture of exactly where do those benefits flow from. And it looks like, I don't know if Corey, you wanted to chime in? Or
Actually, I think I'm going to jump in. So sorry, I don't think I've met everybody, but I'm Jonathan Tijerina. I'm the Vice President of Enterprise Risk and Development. So Rick's on my team. I think, Rick, you're bringing up some good points, but I also think we got to remind folks that when we created the program now 12 years ago, it was about reducing that summer peak so that we could reduce those capital costs and O&M costs during the heaviest prices that we traditionally see, especially before Winter Storm Uri, right? It was always about solving for the summer peak. And so when the programs started, we started with efforts to bring in energy efficiency and to figure out ways to incorporate these programs so that we could have a diverse mix. As we've evolved, we've seen more programs and more sophistication where we're reducing, and Rick, correct me, but I think our demand response program is north of 150 megawatts, that at a given point, we can contact our customers, and between residential and commercial customers, they help reduce that peak, which is savings for everyone. Because again, when ERCOT starts doing those calculations to see how much our portion of the grid costs are from a transmission perspective, they base it off of those 4 days in between May, June, July, and August where it's the highest usage. So the more that we're able to reduce during those periods, those are direct savings for all of the customer base, not just folks participating in the program. So I just want to clarify that, because that has really been the value, and that's the type of analysis that you'll see in all the reports that we have, right? Quite honestly, the last 2 years has been about validating and showing support around what the benefits have been from these programs. Now, to people's point, yeah, we probably need to be considerate about what these programs look like into moving forward. And so in that one slide, I think it was 16, Rick pointed out, looking at more of an equitable, low to medium income, kind of sticking to your, whatever the true norths that come from these conversations, that's going to be the type of feedback that we're going to want. There very well could be programs that we've had that we should not be doing anymore. I think we're open to those conversations, and that's the kind of conversation, or feedback I should say, that we're going to be seeking.
Dana, to your point, I just looked up in the book, it's about 20% in the last few years, but the amount, when you say what their savings, I think what you were saying is that the solar is the biggest saver of power, but the cost, so you were looking at, I think you're right on the 60, but it was a different. But the cost, it started out, and it's been coming down because we've been reducing the rebate amount, but it's about 20% of the cost. That's what I was just looking at the book in. And that's a good book. Okay.
My last
Femi.
point, Reed, could I jump in with one last
Sure.
one? The comment about we're paying our customers to use less of our power. Conceptually, though, if our folks are in our community are using less and we still have it and it's economical to run, we'll still sell it. Just not to our customers, we sell it to the wholesale market, and we still make money off of that. So it's not as though you wouldn't have any revenue from that. Anyways, thank you, Reed.
Femi?
I'm going to take what I like to call a systems view of what we've been talking about. I'm not sure what to say yet and what to suggest in terms of where we think the future of energy efficiency programs should be. I've not read the Brattle reports, I've not read the Frontier reports, so I may not really have a reason to say yay or nay or good or bad. But I would react to something that I saw in Rick's presentation, and this is a friendly, very friendly criticism. That figure you showed that was with or without STEP really doesn't help you, because I don't see a lot of change. It's not very helpful, unless you're saying this is one piece of many other programs. And as I said, I have not read the reports, so I don't know if there's maybe a better illustration, but I didn't see much of a change enough to say, whoa, this is great. So I'm sort of at a loss now as to say, well, is this program really good or not? I mean, I've heard all the comments in the board meetings and all that, and I'm not sure yet what to say, because I feel that we're looking too narrowly at STEP, and I'm saying what is STEP in the context of the entire program. Those 5 circles you had in your Venn diagram, to me, makes me wonder how much is STEP really doing, and how much can we gain from other programs or other even fuels. So that's my view, and I cannot say anything by way of suggestions of the future, but I want to mention one thing, which is where I tend to go to when I think about things in the systems sense. We're expecting population to grow. That will always provide an upward pressure on demand. So if we're talking about demand response and all the behavioral and weatherization things, how much of that downward pressure does that put on supply? Because I think we will always have population growth, which will mean you have to be doing your steps and other things at a greater rate to counter the upward pressure from population growth. And that's all I have to say, just by way of comments. Thank you.
I do want to add or respond to a part of that. You said, the difference between the 2 lines is small, and now that was meant as an illustration, so don't mathematically, you saw there was no scale on that. But just for context, when we target energy reduction at a building, at a business, typically we're talking 5 to 10%, right? So it's not 50%, it's not 30%. It's, we're looking for waste of 5 to 10%. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Partly is we don't want folks to be uncomfortable. We want them to be able to, maintain their comfort and so forth. The other part is that it gets really expensive, right? once you get beyond 10%, right? And so, you know, in sort of balancing sort of, you know, the programs and how much we can do, you know, that sort of becomes sort of in the industry, that 5 to 10% is what you sort of target. And it takes a lot to get to that, believe me. It's not as easy as just, you know, you visit a house and it's done. It may take multiple programs to get to that 5 and 10%.
And just, I agree with what you say. And again, I'm doing this in a very friendly way, so please don't take it as a knock on the program. When you say 5% or 10%, or you say that sliver, that little gap is really, you know, worth a certain percentage, I always ask myself, relative to what? Which is why I said, look at your fifth fuel in the context of all the other fuels and say, well, at least our target is, if your target is 12% and you're getting to 10% with that little gap, great. But I don't know that. All you're showing me is a figure that doesn't have a scale. I'm sorry, I'm an engineer. I look at figures and I look at scales. And so when you present that figure to someone, they're going to look at the scale. Even though you don't show a scale, they don't know that. And I keep saying this, if you have a figure that has a scale, please use it, because it'll do you a lot of good and make your program actually represent what it is. I don't know whether illustrative figures are good for things that come with, you know, millions or hundreds of dollars, of thousands of dollars of investments. It's just not helpful professionally. And I'm being very friendly, but I feel it's important to put real numbers in so you can actually tell people this is what this number means.
Fair point, and I will tell you that what we were trying to do is explain a concept. All of the details, all of the numbers are in the reports, and we're happy to dive into that, and we can really dig into the data if you like. But we didn't mean to not, you know, try to not be professional. We were just trying to explain a concept.
Okay, one more time. Let's talk about what we want what you feel is important, you as representing the community, for energy conservation going forward if we have a new program. Kurt.
To state maybe the bleeding obvious, I really like not wasting energy and being as efficient and as use of it as possible. So I think, you know, programs that do that promote that, and that in and of itself is a good thing. But listening to all this discussion and reading some of this material, it's obvious to me the devil's in the details. I mean, you know, we had this solar discussion where, you know, if a community decides, hey, we all want to spend more money because we want to further subsidize solar or anything else, even more than is subsidized at, you know, other levels of government, that's fine. They've decided to do that. They say, I'm happy with that cost, and they do it. But some of these other things, whether it's, you know, smart thermostats or weatherization or whatever, you know, I think, you know, maybe they're a little less controversial. I can't tell. But I think we have to, you know, you have to take a fine eye to the programs like this and decide, you know, what's really achieving the goals and what's equitable. And so the other thing that occurs to me listening to all this is, instead of just going to people and trying to convince them to put in a thermostat, I wonder if there's an opportunity as we move forward to put more teeth into a program like this. So I'll just make this up. I mean, if I'm sitting here, Kurt Anastasio, and you're paying me a subsidy to pay my power bill, and now you come to me and say, and, you know, in return for that, I want a smart thermostat in this house, and I say no, you know, maybe that subsidy should be at risk, you know, as a good citizen in this community. So I'm not a politician. You know, I'm just throwing that out there. But one of the things I look for in programs like this is, where are both sides of what are both sides of the equation here, rather than just one side. But anyway, Reed, your answer is yes. The short answer is yes. I'm for programs like this that help to reduce waste and efficient use of energy, promote efficient use of energy. But really, the devil's in the details of what you're doing to do that.
Thank you. I would say yes to energy efficiency programs and a demand response to lower and manage demand, because at the end of the day, it'll also improve grid reliability. In terms of solar, one type of test in this analysis found solar to be very beneficial, although another test found it might not be as useful. So Actually, I have a couple questions. How can CPS Energy design local solar programs, including solar plus storage, so they can reach the most people and are a benefit to all customers, whether they use solar or not? Also, in a previous analysis by Optimal Energy, they suggested that CPS Energy should consider changing its goal for STEP from non-coincident peak to peak demand and energy savings. Did Brattle look at whether the focus on non-coincident peak was beneficial to CPS Energy customers? Those are my questions.
I'm actually going to touch on the solar one because I think that's one of a lot of interest. So the Brattle report specifically called out the need to put focus on solar for more to low to medium income type solutions. Over the course of the last 5 years, we've run very successful community solar projects where participants who didn't need to have all the requirements for their house could buy into a solar program, and ultimately it'd be like at a solar farm. And so we've done 2 projects of that in the last 5 years that have had success from participation. And I think as mentioned in the slide, we have a lot of interest about what does solar look like into the future. You know, we ourselves recognize that over time we've already changed that rebate, and we've been hearing from a lot of stakeholders that more needs to be changed so that the focus is just different than giving a rebate to folks putting it on their house. With that said, I'll also add, as part of my group also, we have what's it's a business development component of our group as well too. And we're actually looking at solar panels that actually, we're doing a pilot right now. It's like 10 panels, but we're looking at solar panels that actually have energy storage connected to it, right? So that's now being able to harness that and then deploy it at your own kind of residential or commercial level or utility level going into the future. So I guess the main takeaway though is for folks to understand that we are very much open to what the future of solar looks like, realizing that we probably already have a very mature program. And then in addition to that, we're looking at new technologies to figure out what is the future of it. And so I just wanted to point that out. I'll let Rick take the peak question.
Yeah, on the second question. So we're familiar with that recommendation. We did not ask Brattle to look at that because we asked them to stay focused on the questions from the board. But I think to the point, you know, what Optimal was pointing out is that we've been very focused on non-coincident peak. I think they'd like us to focus more on energy, and so we've said that we're open to that, just to make sure that, you know, because there is value in the energy side, not just the capacity. And the step goal was purely capacity.
Okay, we got.
Can I add?
So go ahead, Dean, please. Get around everybody.
Okay, sorry. I would also like to see like this improved for, LMI customers. Looking back at the Brattle presentation on energy burden, one of the recommendations to help people that suffer or are suffering the most from energy burden was to improve energy efficiency and weatherization programs for them. So I hope we keep that in mind. That's it.
Okay, good presentation, Rick. Thank you. When I'm looking, just some basic questions. I have not read the report. I plan on doing that this weekend, and I'll come up with some better questions or more informed questions for the group via email. But I'm looking at future demand response, so how we're going to be able to generate more electricity without an additional plant if we're going to go into start using electric vehicles. That's going to place a lot of demand, and I understand that in addition to that, we may have to go more to solar. And has anyone taken a look at the land demands for solar and wind farms and what that will do to the price of land going forward? And well, that's all I got right now at this point.
Okay. So I'm not sure if that was a form of a question with. Okay. Okay.
We're just going to get around real quick with your inputs.
Okay, well, I'm going to apologize in advance that this may not be as quick as you would like, Reed. Thank you. So I agree with Kurt on how we should be positioning ourselves. And I also, we've talked about this, and we need to keep it in the forefront of our brains, as Reed has said, to be flexible, to allow for changes in technology, not put ourselves in a box that's cemented, because things change, and they change in ways that we can't even perceive them yet. So we always need to have some ability to turn, right? Now, solar, I'm not going to say I'm the only person in this room, but I bet you I'm close to that. I was one of the first people to put up a solar array. I was also one of the first participants of buying panels on the farm. There are people in this room who may remember the little debacle that happened with the Bexar County Tax Assessor Department and solar panels on the farm. I had a period of time the year before last where my panels were, because of the person that, or the company that was running that, CPS said, we don't own them, right? You have a third party that's doing all of that, where I didn't even have production for a number of months. I was never compensated for that. I'm not asking to be compensated, but I was never even given, there was nothing. It was crickets. It was just a flat line on the bill, and then CPS finally had to take it back over from the Colorado company that I'm assuming may have failed or something happened. So there are the devils in the details, Kurt. Exactly. There's ways that these programs get managed that are not, I'm not going to say they're not well thought through, but you can't cover every single component until it's in your face. And the in the face for me was the letter from BCAD telling me that I was now in the business of producing solar energy, and I needed to inventory my panels and pay a tax on them. Thank you very much. That didn't go very far. People may remember my name because I was the one that led that charge and stared them down. So nobody paid any taxes, but it took a heck of a lot of work. Thank you.
Can we bring slide 10 back up, please?
That's 17,
10, please. Okay, so here's where the devil again is in the details. Like Femi, I'm an engineer, so I want to know more of the details, and I submitted a very detailed question about this exact slide back in the summer and got a little bit of a response back, but was basically told you couldn't answer my question. Hopefully you still can someday. So to back up a little bit, the top part of that that calculation there for the UCT is that is the savings, avoided costs. Well, part of that is savings to the customer, which is great. It's savings in the installation of, say, solar or attic insulation or windows. It's savings to the customer in future electric bills, which is largely the component of fuel. But again, it's savings to that individual customer, and that's okay, but a very small percentage of our customers use these services. The other savings, and we've talked about it, and I think it was one of the main reasons this program started years ago, is there's savings to CPS Energy. There's the operations and maintenance savings, and then there's specifically the avoidance of new plants. And that's great because those savings to CPS Energy, those are shared by all of the ratepayers. And what I would like to see is for this calculation to be split out into two different numbers. Right now it's all bundled in, and we look at these UCTs, and this looks super successful, and this is how we sell the renewal of this program. But I want to know, what is that UCT for that benefit to just the customer, individual customer, and what is the UCT For CPS Energy, which is the value to all customers across San Antonio. And the answer to my question when I put it in writing last summer was something along the lines of, yeah, well, we really haven't broken it out that way, but you're still showing it this way, and you're still going to sell it to the board and to the city council with this inflated number that doesn't show how much of this savings really is to all ratepayers, meaning that it's avoided O&M and avoided capital costs, and how much of this savings is just to an individual, where 95% of our ratepayers are now paying for the 5% that use these programs. And I don't know if that's exactly right, but I calculated the numbers out of your reports, and it's a very small percentage that use any of these programs.
Yeah, so just to dig into that a little bit. So the UCT, utility cost test, is a very specific test. I showed the chart with the 5 different tests. This is from the utilities perspective. So the benefits you see on the top side are the benefits of avoided energy and generation to the utility. So give me a second. I'll get to your question here in a minute. So this is one indicator of, you know, does this lower
Can I just stop you for just a second?
Sure.
Avoided fuel costs, though, is savings to that individual customer. It doesn't get spread across all of the customers. What gets spread across to all customers is the savings in O&M and in new capital. If that avoided fuel cost is avoided fuel cost to those individuals who took advantage of this program. That doesn't get shared by all the other customers.
Yeah. So what the tests try to do is look at the benefits from multiple perspectives. And there's the test at the top that's called the participant cost test. So I think this is the one getting to what you're asking is, if I'm a customer and I participate and I save energy and I get the benefit of a rebate and so on and so forth, what does it look like to me, right, relative to my investment? And that PCT, which is the top one, that I think that may be the perspective you're asking about. And Brattle did look at that, and I believe it's in the appendix where they calculated this for our programs. When we talked back a few months back, we had not done that. And so I think we had, in our response, we looked at a few programs. We didn't do them all. The report has the holistic view. So I'd point you to that, and then if you have questions on that, we can dig into that. But we were trying to get to your point with having them look at that.
Well, again, going back to the calculation, I think that the decision makers need to see those 2 different numbers. What is that UCT for avoided O&M and capital, and what is that UTC for avoided fuel, which is really to an individual customer? That will show the real picture of how successful this program is for CPS Energy as a whole. When you bundle in the fuel savings, which is only a savings to that individual customer, you're sending a false picture of the real benefit to all of the customers, because that benefits only to that little slice of customers taking advantage of this program. So you need to create 2 different numbers to show our decision makers.
You're exactly right. And in Monday, when we talked about this, the one thing I did want them to talk about, which we will have to reset and do that at our next meeting, and we will do that, because I think if you're going to try to understand the Frontier report or any of the reports, you have to understand these metrics, okay? And they're not straightforward, okay? And we've got to understand these metrics, and we will make it a point next time, just like you're saying, Michael, we'll make it a point in the very first to go through these metrics. Now, they're handled in the appendices, and you can see them. And as somebody mentioned earlier, the solar was completely different on these 2, and the winterization didn't look good in either one of them, okay? So we will do that next time. And I want to apologize to the folks that we didn't get to. We're out of time. We've got a hard stop at 6. We'll start with y'all next time. If we'll just stay in the same, we got...
Rick, can we do a clarifying point? Rick, on that equation, that's fuel that's going into our power plants, right? That is shared by all our customers. It's not a direct fuel cost. Can you clarify? Make sure I understand that. On the UCT.
So it's the value of our avoided energy and our avoided capacity. So it's not direct fuel. It's what does it cost us to generate that energy and that capacity.
So it's the fuel going into the power plant that would run the power plant.
In part, yeah. Among other things, yeah.
It's avoided cost.
Right.
And fuel's part of it.
Right.
Look, I want to apologize because the one thing I really wanted to do is have a good explanation of these metrics. Michael's right, he's been asking for it. If we don't understand the metrics, you can't understand the book. And next time, I apologize, we'll do that first. I'll make sure that it's done, and we'll talk about these metrics, okay? And with that, I apologize to those that didn't get to speak, and I apologize to you, Anita, we didn't get back to you again, but we will take more time for this next time. We've got the group that's going to come together and work on the model. Thank you very much for your time and attention tonight.